Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the LEEP final event. Thank you to those brave souls of you who have joined us here in person, despite the corona pandemic, and also to all of you who've joined us online. It does feel slightly strange to be standing here in a suit. It's the first time I've been wearing a jacket and tie and trousers for quite some time. We're here today to celebrate the LEEP program and the successes that we've had in supporting small and medium enterprises through an extraordinarily difficult time for Lebanon and for Lebanese businesses. We're here to thank our wonderful partners and team without whom none of this would have been possible. But most of all, we're here to celebrate the wonderful SMEs who we've worked with through the program, to celebrate their ingenuity, their enterprise, and their entrepreneurial spirit. You will have lots of chances to meet them over the course of the day and to hear from them. And I really hope you take advantage of that. Those of you who are physically present, there's a number of stalls outside with some of our SMEs represented. There are many more of our SMEs who will be here and also online that you can meet with and talk to them. So I do encourage you to take advantage of that. Before we do that, though, we're going to take some time to reflect on the challenges that small and medium enterprises are facing and to think about what can be done about that. Many of the solutions are very well known. And so I really want to focus the discussion and the both after the presentation and during our panel discussion on what can actually be done to really make reform happen. And we'll be doing a lot of that. So we will start today with a policy advocacy session talking about the needs and challenges of SMEs. We will then also have a presentation from Irakli Makava, former Minister of Economy and Deputy Minister of Economy in Georgia, who has encountered a similar situation in Georgia, dealing with a highly corrupt government and how they were able to reform that and make the business environment for SMEs much easier. So look forward to an exciting discussion. Thank you all for coming. And I'm going to hand over now to Alex Reed from the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office here in Beirut, who is joining us on the video link.
Thank you, James. Good morning, all. I'll say a few similar things to James. So firstly, a thanks. Thank you to ESSA for hosting us, for those joining online and in person today, for the phenomenal SMEs that have been part of the LEAP program over the past 4 years, for policymakers and donors and all of those who are engaging with us today in these really important conversations. I left Lebanon about a month ago, and even in that time, it's incredible how much the economic crisis has worsened. It is therefore incumbent on us that it's even more important that we have these discussions about urgent reforms, critical changes that the private sector needs as the situation gets worse day by day. But as James says, it is also a celebration of the successes of the programme and looking forward to what we can take from the learnings and what our set of innovative and creative SMEs mean for the future of Lebanon. The programme supported almost 500 SMEs, created 1,500 jobs, which is small in the context of Lebanon's crisis, but is a huge amount to be proud of and has made real impacts to people's lives and people's businesses. So I think I'll leave it there. I really encourage everybody to engage thoroughly in the conversations throughout the day. I hope businesses will be able to network, to make connections, which will help to see their businesses grow. I hope that collectively we can kind of come together and advocate for the reforms that the sector needs to move forwards. So thank you again, and I hope it's a really productive day.
Thank you, Alex. I'm going to start with a short presentation to share with you some of the findings. We're publishing a report today. You should be able to pick up a copy of that, which contains much more detail on the findings and what we found in terms of the challenges of SMEs and what our SMEs in particular think about what should be done to fix those challenges. I'm going to share a summary of it with you today. And as I said, I wanted to spend more of the time talking about, well, the so what's, what can actually be done to really encourage reform and to make the government make the vital reforms that are needed. SMEs are vital to the health of the economy. They are in Lebanon, that 90% of the registered businesses are SMEs. They employ over 50% of the working population. They're also vital for innovation and for driving the disruptive change that keeps economies healthy. They're also, unfortunately, usually the first to suffer as the result of an economic crisis. But given their energy and entrepreneurial spirit, they're also often the first to bounce back. And what we wanted to explore through the work that we have done with SMEs is what can be done in terms of regulatory reform to make it easier for them to bounce back so that the SMEs can pull us out of the crisis that we're in. You'll probably hear, so the session, as I said earlier, we're going to start off with a presentation. We're going to have a panel discussion. We have a distinguished panel joining us today, sharing their thoughts. And also, we want to make this a discussion. So we want to hear from you, the audience, both here and online. And then we will have a case study from Georgia to give us all hope that you can change things. It's not inevitable that this will stay the same. I won't talk about this too much. Alex has already shared the numbers. You'll hear a lot about them all over the course of the day. But LEEP has supported 481 small and medium enterprises across the country with cash grants and business development services. We've helped to create 1,500 jobs across various different sectors throughout the economy, and we've dispersed over $6.5 million worth of grant funds over the course of the last 2 years. As a result of that, we've obviously got to know SMEs quite well. And so the FCDO, Alex and his team asked us to really look into what are the challenges that SMEs are facing and what can be done to alleviate those, and to then take that information and start working with the government to see what can be done in terms of reform. So we have done a listening exercise. We have run a wide-scale survey with about 200 SMEs from across the country and from various different sectors. We also held a series of roundtables with different sectors in the economy. So we had with our BDS providers, with the technology industry, agro-processing, manufacturing, hospitality, retail, agriculture, and we also arranged a session with the League of Lebanese Women in Business to really understand the difficulties faced in particular by female entrepreneurs. The findings were quite grim. This shouldn't be a huge surprise. Much of what I will say is not going to be a huge surprise, but the vast majority of businesses have seen their revenues decline significantly over the course of the last year. There are some good news stories. So you can see that some did see their revenues increase, and we can talk a little bit about that. They're mostly in industries where either they have suddenly become a lot more competitive as their costs have dropped for exports, or they're being able to provide import substitution. But the vast majority of SMEs are suffering badly. SMEs normally struggle with access to finance. Cash is the lifeblood of business. It was tough before. The borrowing environment was difficult. Interest rates were very high. And as we all know, to our great cost, banks were far more focused on lending to government rather than to the productive economy. That will need to change. That will change. But with the advent of the crisis, even that small and expensive amount of lending dried up. People couldn't access their savings to support the businesses because they were locked in banks. And even things like invoice finance, so inventory finance, where companies would give stock with generous payment terms, those have gone away as well, as inflation has made that impossible. So really, the financial crisis has been catastrophic for small and medium enterprises in particular. Many SMEs have obviously had to take actions to get around that. Our sample was 75% LEAP SMEs, so people who've been supported to actually create employment. So these numbers are probably a little bit misleading. The numbers of people who are laying off workers or scaling back their services are at 26% and 29%, they are probably not representative of the economy as a whole. So if you imagine even companies that were being given cash grants to grow and create jobs were thinking about laying off workers. The encouraging thing is that 70% of businesses were finding new markets, thinking of new ways to continue growing and to continue being able to operate, showing the incredible resilience and entrepreneurship of the SMEs that we've been working with and the SME sector in Lebanon in general. This, to me, though, was perhaps the most worrying and depressing. And the majority, 70% of SMEs, said that without anything changing, they would not be able beyond a year. This survey was done in January, getting to the point where we're already seeing this starting to happen. Again, this may be an underestimate for the economy as a whole. I know that World Bank, and hopefully Zaina Khoury from the World Bank will be able to tell us a little bit about that. Their numbers were even worse than this. And the Ministry of Economy and Trade said that 50% of SMEs registered with them have already shut their doors. And if you think about that, this is 90% of enterprises in the economy. It's 50% of employment. The consequences of 60 or 70% of these businesses shutting their doors on an already fragile country. It is an urgent been finding new export markets. They've been finding new opportunities to tap finance through programs like LEEP and others. So there is hope there. It's not all completely bleak. And given the ingenuity, given the drive and the adaptability of the SMEs in Lebanon, I feel confident that they will be able to pull through and see us out of the other side. But it will take effort, and it will take also action from government and from the donor community. As a result of the work we've done, we looked at a number of different areas affecting small and medium enterprises, both things that cost a lot of money and take a longer time to change. So things like the macroeconomic environment, so sorting out the exchange peg, sorting out inflation, interest rates, budget balance, those things will take a long time. They will require donor support. They're not going to happen overnight. Similarly, on infrastructure, I mean, there are things that can be done in the short run, but fixing the electricity, fixing the internet, fixing roads, transport networks, etc., that again will require donor support, and it will require large amounts of money that aren't going to be available in the short run realistically. Human capital is somewhere between the two. So there are things that take a long time. Changing an education system takes many years, often up to a generation, but there are things that can be done in a relatively short order. So that's somewhere between the two. But there are an awful lot of things that can be changed very quickly with the right political will that will make a huge difference for small and medium enterprises. So access to finance, encouraging banks to lend to SMEs, increasing the ease with which equity markets operate, allowing more people into the equity markets, and also alternative financing opportunities, so things like crowdfunding, etc., which at the moment, due to regulation, are quite difficult to do. That means there's so chambers of commerce, industry, etc., many things that they can do to support SMEs and to pressure the government. Innovation policy, in particular, a procurement policy, so making it easier for SMEs to provide innovative solutions in government needs, and making it easier for them to bid for those projects. And then possibly the most important piece, the biggest area, is doing business. So all the points of interaction that small and medium enterprises have with government, making those easier and ensuring that SMEs are able to do business without the hindrance of government getting in the way. So starting a business, the bureaucracy, a thing that takes permits that are needed, the very an awful lot of negotiation, let's put it that way, importing, exporting and trading, the standards that apply, taxation, social security, payments infrastructure, and for those people either entering bankruptcy or choosing to close down their business, the bureaucracy associated with that. So we spent a long time discussing these with SMEs, understanding the challenges that they face, and then working with them to think about what can be done to fix this situation. Unsurprisingly, the efforts of interacting with government and the corruption involved in doing that was a huge problem for many SMEs. The majority of SMEs spent at least a week every year dealing with government, and some SMEs, I think right at the top, 7% of SMEs, so almost 1 in 10 SMEs, spent 60 days a year. 60 days a year. Think of the massive productivity sink that is. If you as an SME owner are having to spend 60 days of your year dealing with government instead of thinking about your business, thinking about ways to grow, thinking about new markets, how much better would things be if you didn't have to do that? Also, unsurprisingly, corruption, 82% of SMEs found corruption to be a burden on the business and a brake on their growth. And that, I think, really says it all. There are all sorts of other problems. I mean, obviously, customs cost and efficiency in customs regulations are also way up there in terms of things that were problematic. And most interactions with government were problematic in some way or form for SMEs. We worked a lot on different priorities. So critical things that absolutely need to happen now before anything else happens in order to get us out of the worst of the crisis. Urgent priorities that are cheap and relatively quick to implement, that are highly beneficial to SMEs and that will focus on improving the business environment. And then the longer term reform things, those things that are going to cost a lot of money, require donor support and aren't going to be fixed overnight. You can read about all of these in our report. I encourage can at least stop the rot and reduce losses in the electricity and water system. Some ridiculous amount of water is lost through piping or through illegal connections. Similarly with electricity, if you can stop that, and that is relatively easy to do, it requires political will, as we all know, and political will is the big challenge, as we'll talk about later. But it can be done, and that will already help things. Similarly, proper enforcement of laws and regulations, again, it requires political will, but it's relatively easy to do. And Irakli will talk a lot about how this was done in Georgia later on. On doing business, it's really all about stripping out procedures, transparency, and stopping as many face-to-face interactions as possible. I'm sure many of us in this room, miserable hours wandering around government offices, being pointed in different directions by people who frankly don't have a clue, usually on a hot, sweaty day. So the more that can be avoided, the better. Putting as much online as possible, making exactly who you need to see, what documents you need, how much it will cost you, making that all clear and transparent online, absolutely vital. And then clearly a thorough anti that actually government is more of a hindrance to us than anything else. Unfortunately, that, you know, rather like death and taxes, government is inevitable. It will be there, but what can the private sector do on their own? So we may talk about this later, but can the chambers of commerce, for example, take the lead in figuring out what are the rules and regulations, making them transparent so that everybody knows them and that they can't be challenged when they walk into a ministry and say, this is what I've got to do, these are the people I've got to see. Identifying champions of reform, and this can be done by SMEs, chambers themselves, it can be done by the international community, but finding those people within the ministries who are actually committed to making reform happen, working with them as a collective to try and push things through. Transparency. Now, transparency, we want the government to be transparent, but in the absence of a transparent government, we all as individuals can shine a light on what's happening. Irakli, hopefully we'll talk about this again. I said, now, how are you able to afford this on a custom salary? And that was broadcast live on TV. So that kind of action to really shine a light on what is happening, where is the corruption happening, who is involved, will also help to create change. And then finally, you know, we can do a lot ourselves, but external pressure is also very, very helpful in terms of the international community trying to put pressure on the government and trying to get them to make the changes that need to happen. I'm going to leave it there. We will have lots of time for questions and discussion, and I really encourage you all to get involved in the discussion, both here in the room and online. But now I would like to move over to our panel. Right, the clicker's a little bit out of range. Apologies for that. So I'm delighted to welcome Alex Reed, who you've already met, the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office person responsible for the LEEP project and also the lead economist in the embassy in Beirut. Youssef Saber, who is here on the stage with us, who is the founder of Wakilni, also the chairman of the League of Lebanese Women in Business, an extraordinarily successful businesswoman, who has been extremely helpful helping us with producing the report. Naji Boutros, who is, to say he's just an SME is a little bit of an underestimate of all that Naji has done. He is a successful investor in a number of Lebanese businesses and globally, but also is a small medium enterprise owner with the Telegraph and the Bellevue restaurant. We also have Zaina Al-Khouri from the World Bank, who is the local private sector specialist. Unfortunately, we are not able to be joined by Nasser Saidi, who had to pull out at the last minute, but we have an extremely distinguished and capable panel and looking forward to the discussion. So thank you, panelists, and welcome. I'm going to ask a few questions to the panel just to kick things off. As I said before, much of the contents of this presentation and the report that we have produced is not new. Everybody has known this. As I said, the Ministry of Economy and Trade knows this, and they're doing their best to make these things happen. Has so far proven very elusive. Some things have been done, but... So I'd like to ask the panel what they think needs to happen in order for change to start happening and change to be made. And as Yusta has turned up in person, I'll start with her.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Basically, as a start, I would actually like to see the government actually seriously taking these reports, really understanding the content of them, really understanding the SMEs in general and what sectors they are found. Like just the report itself has a lot of information. It gives a lot of guidance, but it requires a lot of seriousness, basically, and a lot of commitment to actually wanting to do that, wanting to do these reforms. So that is as a start. Then trying to identify which regulations we can loosen a little bit, which policies to put in place that would make business happen faster. I'll just give you a very simple example. Today in Lebanon, every single thing that you need to do takes 10 times more time than it usually used to do. You cannot even open a bank account. If a business happens to be, and we saw a lot of businesses that are now finding new sources of revenues, for example, if they want to do any kind of expansion, and you cannot open a bank account, you cannot do any transactions, you cannot even register a vehicle. You have to wait for days until the authorities are open. So just the basics to get things, to get whoever is still standing on their feet to actually be able to work.
So really just making it very clear to the government what needs to be done, and really putting pressure on them to make reforms. Naji, would you like to give your thoughts as well?
Hi. I mean, look, the report is excellent and the work you've done is excellent. And I don't think there's any point in me describing that the traditional backers of SMEs, i.e. government and banks, have been your worst enemies in Lebanon. So it's been a disastrous journey for us who are investors in Lebanon, in small businesses like Chateau Bellevue and Le Telegraph, and really big businesses like Cortas, and even smaller, like the smallest of businesses, such as the seed incubator, Nucleus Ventures. I think these businesses have performed extremely well in the last 12 months, believe it or not, because we have focused on the expats, okay? It's been tremendous for us because the expats have rallied around Lebanese exports. But what worries me a lot is where we're heading from here. That's really, for me, it's very hard to imagine that we can turn around Lebanon quickly unless these fundamental reforms are put together and with the assistance of groups such as yourselves. But also I think there's a major need in the mindset of the Lebanese business. I've discovered that Lebanese businesses need to reform themselves to be able to compete globally. Obviously, I've had to spend 10 times, a lot more, on my journeys and overseas travels, which in time of COVID is very difficult. But I've discovered that we're not as competitive as we think. We're not as humble as we think. We need to forget what our mothers told us, that we're the best in the world. And we really, truly need to be involved in politics this time, by voting or by taking bigger role. And we really need to connect with our distant cousins in Australia and everywhere who used to, that we've known many, many years ago, because they've become essential for us to learn and to sell product to. James, I mean, I don't know if you guys need me to go any further, but I'm really worried about Lebanon. At the same time, I think Lebanon is such a small country that it will not take much for it to recover. We just need stability. I mean, I think in the short term, we can deal with corruption. We can deal with the government in the short term, because every company in Lebanon has somebody that does the government papers. And yes, it's a tax. And yes, it takes time and energy, but we can deal with that. But what we cannot deal with is the bad perception of Lebanon and the lack of stability. That we cannot deal with. All our businesses are suffering a tremendous brain drain right now. And you can increase the salaries of the top guys, but you cannot, and you can increase the salaries of everybody in the company. But what you cannot do is convince a mother to stay in Lebanon. You cannot convince a proud man to accept humility at the gas station, at the gas stations. Sorry, I misspoke. To accept being offended at the gas stations. So I think that summarizes my mindset right now. I've got a lot of hope, but I'm terribly down at the same time.
Thank you, Naji. I think you raised a number of important points there. I think the brain drain was certainly something that all the sessions that we ran with SMEs came up. People weren't just worried as business owners, but also as fathers, as grandparents. This is clearly a huge source of worry for everybody, with the talent draining out of the country. Unfortunately, fixing the brain drain, before you can fix that, you have to fix everything else. So it's really vital to really make these reforms that will, as Naji said, and Yusra said, will help it, make it easier to do business, make things better, so that people see a future and see a reason to stay. I think you also raised two other very important points about the need to get involved in politics, to vote, to encourage people to vote, to put pressure on MPs, etc., to really make sure that the change is happening, and to also to mobilize expats, both as customers and as a source of revenue for businesses, but also as an extra form of pressure on the government. I mean, there's far more people outside the country than inside the country. There's probably far more voters outside the country than inside the country, and they can be a real source for change. I'd love to hear next from Zaina in your thoughts. You obviously you deal with the government a lot. You hopefully you'll have a perspective on what you think needs to happen in order for them to start making change.
So thank you, James. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today with this panel to discuss the priority reforms for the private sector. First, James, let me thank you for the excellent presentation that really describes the situation very well in terms of the impact of the multiple crises on the firms and in terms of identifying what are the priority reforms. So as you mentioned in your intervention, at the World Bank, we've done a very similar exercise to assess the impact of the 4 mega crises on the private sector, and we had very similar and even more devastating results. So according to our survey, which was implemented in December 2020, almost 1 out of 5 firms in Lebanon is consumed or assumed permanently closed since the beginning of the crisis, that is between October 2019 and up until November 2020 when we did the survey. Almost half of the firms in Lebanon have been affected by the explosion, either directly or indirectly. 4 out of 5 firms experienced drop in sales of about 70%. This is really catastrophic, to be honest. More than half of the firms experienced liquidity challenges, and this was even back in November 2020. We expect, the results that are the second tracker survey to be even worse. 3 out of 5 firms decreased the number of permanent workers by around 40%. And 25% actually of firms, they expected only to last 27 weeks, which is about 6 months at the current cost. Now, going back to your question, despite the fact that reforms have been, yes, known to all, they have been well documented in many frameworks and plans, including even those drafted by the government itself, implementation has been very slow in the past not year, but also in the past decades. If you look at the commitments of the government in Paris 1, Paris 2, said up until now, nothing much has been happening. And this boils down to one thing that you clearly mentioned and highlighted in your introduction, which is the lack of political willingness and the consensus on the reforms. So these are really prerequisites for any reform in any government. But of course, to ensure that we have a successful process from the start until implementation, there are key elements that need to be embedded in this reform process. One, the inclusivity of the reform process. So the government and the political establishment, of course, that is behind it, they need to commit to a credible and legitimate reform plan where the private sector is really properly consulted in the design of this plan and throughout the whole reform process. This is really very important to ensure the buy-in and commitment. Second, reform champions or coalitions. So reform champions or reform coalitions are really needed to persistently keep on pushing and advocating for the right reforms, to bring up the evidence and the potential impact, the opportunity costs of inaction, and build a strong case for those reforms. These coalitions, they need to include leadership figures from different constituencies, civil society, think tanks, and researchers. And I think we have been seeing this recently forming up in the past year. 3, I think it's very important to have a solid governance structure that is responsible for reform implementation. We all know that reforms are complex. They involve many people, multiple stakeholders. So having the right structure for implementation is critical for ownership to properly manage, coordinate, and follow up later on actions that need to be done. So in Lebanon, many times we see that reforms are initiated because of public pressure, but then fade away, either because there is a change in government or because of a lack of ownership or limited, technical or institutional capacities within the ministries to move forward with the reforms. So this monitoring follow-up is really very important to really ensure that those reforms are implemented. Just an example, in Pakistan, for example, they developed a platform to track the reform process for business environment reforms. So the tracker, it's a platform that highlights where the reform stands, what's its status, the timeline, where it's stuck, which ministry. And I think this is very useful in the case of Lebanon. It can enhance transparency, accountability, and inform the public where they need to put more pressure. Sequencing and showing results, I think it's also very important. I mean, the Lebanese people has lost confidence in the government and in its ability to reform. So it's really important to start showing some results to rebuild this and to create the momentum. And to maintain momentum. It's not important only to create the momentum, but also to maintain it. And the last but not least, of course, it's communication. I think it's very critical from both sides, whether from the government to really inform the public in a very transparent manner what is happening, and from the people to put more pressure. Leveraging media also is critical. So these are like my thoughts on what is needed to really ensure to create and maintain the momentum, and to ensure that implementation of reform is sustainable and successful in the medium and long term. Thanks, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Zaina. There's a huge amount in there, and some really, really important points about the importance of engaging the private sector, the inclusivity of the reform process, building those coalitions, finding those champions, ensuring the proper governance is in place, the transparency, and making sure that results are delivered and shared, and the communication. So really, thank you very much for that. I'd like to finish this question with Alex and your thoughts on what you think needs to be done, and also the perspective of the international donors and what they can do to help.
Thank you, James. No, I completely agree with everything that has been said, which is the challenge of going last. But I think I'll say three things. So firstly, obviously and absolutely critically, we need government. We haven't had a government for a year, and that government needs to stabilise the situation as well as start to build the roadmap to reforms. Lebanon is at risk of running into being a humanitarian crisis. So we desperately need a government that takes action. On Zaina's point around delivery and implementation, I think that's absolutely crucial. We have so many reform roadmaps. We have so many kind of previous international conferences that have set an agenda. What is crucial is delivery. I worked in Pakistan previous to Lebanon, and I worked on with the IFC and the World Bank on ease of doing business reforms. And what was successful about that is one, as Zaina said, there was a system of tracking reforms, of monitoring progress, and holding decision makers and the government to account. But secondly, there was also really senior ownership, and that's what needs to happen here. So in Pakistan, for instance, the Prime Minister would attach this kind of delivery unit to his office. He would have oversight of delivery against those reforms. So again, it's not just the mechanisms for overseeing and delivering, it's really, really senior political ownership of that reform agenda. The second thing I would say is that word, the IMF. At any level, the Lebanese authorities need to be engaging with the IMF and discussing the issues. And the IMF ultimately has worked in many, many countries around the world, has dealt with many complicated macroeconomic crises such as Lebanon. It has vital expertise and experience that Lebanon needs in the situations it's in. And also it brings rigor and structure to the reform programs that we've talked about. Crucially, it also brings confidence. So that could bring in further international community support, and it could bring in other private, non-public finance to Lebanon that it needs. So again, the IMF is really a crucial part of this, and conversations need to resume when there is a new government. And then the third thing I'd say is this point around inclusion and participation, and it works in different ways. And as you talked about people making their voice heard and their preferences known through elections, which is absolutely crucial. It's also about how do we get private sector and civil society voices engaged in the day-to-day decision making and reform prioritization and agenda. And I think one example of how you engage civil society possibly could be looking to the 3RF, so the World Bank, UN and EU-led 3RF process. And I noticed we've got Asma Zain on the line. Perhaps in the discussion, we can kind of hear her reflections and others' reflections about how do you have a participatory approach to delivering this. So genuinely, the reform agenda and the implementation is founded on what citizens and what businesses need. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Alex, and some more great points in there. I think that point about inclusion and participation has come out of a number of these from a number of the panelists. Also, clearly, the IMF is crucial, and I was smiling as you were talking about delivery. In a previous life, I helped run a delivery unit, and that really is crucial to actually having someone very senior in government taking ownership and tracking of responsibilities for pushing those reforms through. Again, it requires political will. It requires us to have a government, and that clearly has to be the first point. And anything that we can do to encourage the government to start making reforms is going to be critical. And the IMF is key to that. Thank you all for those reflections. I want also to talk a little bit about, and we've talked about the government, but what is the role of the private sector in helping drive some of this reform, or what can the private sector do on its own? They're already doing a huge amount. They have found workarounds for so many different things. Are there any workarounds, or at least things that the private sector can be doing to really start alleviating some of these challenges without necessarily having to rely on government? And I'm afraid, Alex and Zain, I'm going to leave you to last again, because I really want to get the views of the private sector members that we have here. So we'll start again with Yusa and then move to Naji.
Yeah, so as you said, basically, like, we're forced to actually find parallels to everything. We do everything as a workaround. All the infrastructure, we really have to. They've pushed us to be as innovative as we can be. But a theme that keeps coming up is actually collaborative work. Also among the private sector, it's very, very important. Like there are a lot of initiatives that are happening, and it's important to realize that we don't have to be doing things all over again or reinventing. There's most probably someone that is doing similar work or work that is of use. And if these conversations that are happening, all the roundtables, even what's happening now with the 3RF that Alex mentioned, a lot of bringing together all the different sectors, the players in the different sectors, and understanding what each entity is doing and how we can make use of one another, and how we can be support, not just for the support, but actually building on the work of others. And I think this is this is a little bit new for the Lebanese mentality, to really be working, not just saying that we are collaborating, but actually collaborating and giving credit to one another. I would say that's the first part. And also, like, whenever, if any business, SME, or any entity in the private sector, to also be thinking of, when they are figuring out their solutions, how they can involve others, how it could be beneficial to other entities within the community. So I'll give you an example. At Wakilni, we've been looking to expand outside of Lebanon. We're expanding our operations in terms of logistics outside of Lebanon. We're expanding into Jordan and Cyprus at the moment. And all along, we're also thinking, okay, how can we take with us Lebanese brands and support them with these exports? How can we make the process easier for them? How can we put them under the umbrella and figure out things on their behalf so it becomes a simpler process for them? And we're actually making some progress on several fronts with that. And finally, I think very important, and Naji hit on that a little bit, is that we have to change our mentality. And it just doesn't start with just blaming the government. Yes, there's a lot of blame there, but at the end of the day, we are the people behind that. And yes, we have to change the way that we approach how we look at other our partners in the country, how we look at one another, how we operate in our companies. It's now on our shoulders. It's the time for the private sector to really take the lead in this. But we have to start with the people, with how we run the business, the people that stay in the companies, that are not leaving the country. How are we making life easier for them? We have a responsibility towards them. We have to find innovative ways of, okay, if we cannot alleviate financially, are there other things that we can do? Specifically, now is the time to also think of gender inclusion. Now it's the most difficult. We saw a lot of people that drop out of the workforce, or women, because of all the crises, because they're the first people expected to be like to cover the gaps that that are now at home. No, it's the time for the private sector, or the SMEs specifically, to start thinking of, okay, innovative solutions of how we can make the work environment better to retain people, not just from the financial part, and how we can actually also grow the values that we want to see on a macro scale, on our government, on how we want to see the country. Are we instilling these values in the small teams that we have? Because I'm a very big believer that these things start from the communities around us, how we operate on daily basis, how we are fighting corruption. What values are we showing every day to the small team around us that they can take with them to their homes and to their communities? Yeah.
Thank you. Very, very powerful words. I wanted, before we move on to Naji, just to pick up on a couple of things that you said. I think, thank you so much for raising the point about gender equality and ensuring that 50% of the workforce, if not more, is female. There's so much talent, and there's so much to be gained from actually being gender inclusive in the workforce. And we're going to talk a lot more about that later on this afternoon. There's another panel with the LLWB where we'll talk about that. But I think that's a really important point to raise. And one of the other things that is also in the report is the question of what could be done to make it easier for women, both as entrepreneurs, but also as employees, and what sort of measures can the government take to do that? So thank you very much for raising that. The other thing I wanted to pick up on, and I wanted to ask you another question on this, is you talked about that, and we've heard this from many of the SMEs, that people aren't necessarily used to working together and collaborating. And I'd like to get a sense from you of what you think is needed to get that collaboration to happen. What is the sort of, what makes it successful in your experience?
I think just talking and communicating, and this is why these kinds of talks and these kinds of forums and the roundtables that were happening throughout the last period, they're just bringing people together, and they're teaching people to work with one another. I think that's the most important starting point.
So you start with the conversations. That helps to build trust, and with the trust comes the ability to work together more effectively. Thank you. Naji, I'd love to get your perspective as well on what you think the private sector. I think you've talked a little bit about this already, but your additional thoughts on what you think can be done.
First of all, just as a quick follow-up, what we've discovered on gender equality is that one of our businesses is totally led by women, and they do a much better job than the men. For all you men out there, they are incredible managers, and they immerse themselves so much in the business and have no ego. That's been our experience. It's the case with one of our Chateau Bellevue, actually, and it's been a tremendous journey. Look, I mean, for us, Lebanon, again, because we focus so much on exporting products and exporting the talent, Lebanon is only one small link in a much bigger chain. And this is how we learned we figured out how to cope with Lebanon, is just think of it as a production place. And it's one of, unfortunately, I say this, it's one of now many production places that we're exploring for our food production business, for example. Or it's one place where stuff is produced and is sold overseas. So in a way, we're diluting the Lebanese hurdles effect by not putting all our eggs in one basket. That's one. And two, we operate our businesses truly as a global business. Okay, so for us, things are black and white. And this is very important for the mission of what we do to be understood throughout the entire corporate structure. So from the smallest employee to the top guy, you don't bribe, for example. Okay, you operate within the following global standards. It's the fact that you're in Lebanon, and when you go home and you turn the TV on, I mean, we encourage everybody not to turn the TV on, not to read the local newspaper. It doesn't make any sense, I know, but it's just the only way we've been able to operate within Lebanon. And unfortunately, we've been trying to shield everybody from the local problems by having buses for transportation, and we don't want them to be in Lebanon in so many ways. I don't know what else to say.
Thank you, Naji. I have given that advice of turn off the TV to my kids, and they don't think it's very good advice, but I still stick with it. I think you also, along with Yusr, raised that very important point about culture and values. People follow their, showing people that it's not okay to bribe, making sure that that culture, those values are instilled throughout the organization, and that will trickle down, and that's really the starting point. So thank you for that. I'm going to move to Alex next, and then Zaina, you get your turn as last person on the list. So Alex, your thoughts.
So sadly, I lost all of Naji's audio through that, so I missed all his good points. I'll just say a couple of things, and it would be great if we have input and ideas from the audience as well. It'd be great to hear from a range of businesses on this issue. I think for me, one thing is this issue of leading by example, which we've seen in many of our businesses. So the point around inclusive hiring practices, how do you have a gender balanced workforce? How do you hire people with disabilities? How do you hire other vulnerable groups? So how does the private sector collectively demonstrate some of these inclusive values that we've seen through the program, which is just one small thing, but something that the private sector can really lead on. There's the point around kind of collaboration and communication that others have made, and I think there's still more that chambers of commerce and business associations can do to bring businesses together in a coordinated manner to advocate collectively for those businesses. James, you made a really good point in your presentation around some of the tasks that flow from that. So mapping the sets of regulations and rules that businesses have to wade through to get things done, making those transparent, making those accessible. So while there are a lot of actions that the government needs to take on this, business associations, chambers, collective groups of businesses can make the kind of context and the process easier to follow and understand for those businesses. There's work that they can do themselves to make that easier to follow. And then I think the last is how do you, as a private sector, engage directly with the government? How do you advocate for some of these reforms that we talked about? So how do you strengthen ties and engagement with decision makers in the financial sector and the central bank, with different government ministries, with permanent parts of government ministries, so below ministerial level? So how do you kind of strengthen that dialogue and advocacy line on behalf of businesses?
Thanks, Alice. So I think another shout out for collective action, for coming together, for again, identifying those champions of reform below the level of minister, and using the voice that you have as collectively as business to really engage with them. So thank you. And last but not least, Zaina, your thoughts as well.
Thanks, James. So a clear message we always hear from different business owners, whether large or small, whenever we meet with them, is that the private sector is not waiting for government reforms or expecting any of those in the short term. So indeed, firms, they have found ways to deal and through workarounds, creative alternatives, but they are using their own internal resources and their buffers are really getting exhausted. So shortage of electricity, they install solar panels, UPSs, batteries, you name it. internet providers. Some companies are working on carpooling solutions. So larger firms are pivoting their business models and revenue streams, expanding in foreign markets, of course, which is very welcome. Trying to renegotiate with their suppliers to address the lack of financing and ensure that they have access to fresh dollars. But to be honest, this takes a lot of time, energy, and resources, all of which are currently not available for any struggling business that is in a crisis mode, and especially for the smaller sized businesses. This means more layoffs, more bankruptcies, and more closures down the road. So we saw in the past year or 2 years the emergence of some of the private sector-led solutions, some being supported also by the diaspora. For example, there's the Cedar Oxygen Fund that will provide trade financing for exporters. There are multiple funds, smaller funds that are established, with the support of diaspora, to help damaged businesses after the explosion. However, these are also limited in terms of size and do not fill the huge gap. Now, there are limits to how much the private sector can really operate in the absence of reforms. So private sector operations, are governed by an investment climate where the government has a big role to ensure that it is competitive. Fiscal, monetary, trade policies, business regulations, they all determine the ease of doing business, the cost, and of course this impacts the investment decisions and for business owners. So now, can the private sector influence those policies and help improve the business environment? Yes, it can and it should. And this brings me back to my first comment on the reforms and the role of the private sector. So as everybody mentioned in the panel, the private sector really should play an important role in advocating for these reforms, for simplified procedures for doing business. In my views, they need to be more proactive in presenting solutions that can impact the sector and not specific for one firm. So, for example, the private sector, and here I'm talking about associations and chambers, they can support drafting new laws, upgrading existing ones, and submitting them to the relevant ministries. We know that laws in Lebanon are extremely outdated, and they can support the drafting, submit them to the ministry with the needed regulatory assessment that can help push and ensure the readiness of the government to implement those reforms. Also, I see a strong role for the associations, as you mentioned, especially to support smaller businesses by offering really a wide range of services, legal advice, capacity building, raising awareness about solutions and opportunities. Yusra, in her intervention, she mentioned that there is really a learning now. Everybody is learning. So I think associations can reduce this learning curve for other businesses by sharing this information, organizing trade missions, export promotion. One final thought here, they also, can facilitate collective action. So I'm thinking, for example, many firms in Lebanon are now trying to acquire or procure solar panels. I think, for example, the associations, they can do bulk procurement to try to reduce the cost on businesses. These are just a few ideas from my side. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Linda. Really, really helpful and some really interesting thoughts, and a lot of, again, some of these thoughts on collective action, on lobbying, on actually presenting the government with well thought through plans for what actually needs to happen, or even draft laws, and coming together either as buyers to leverage the bulk potential bulk buying, and also sort of providing advice and help to each other through this collective action. So thank you very much. Yes, sir, you wanted to add something?
I may, because something caught my attention when Naji was talking about, it almost felt, but I'm guilty of the same, when we're not listening to the news, when we're avoiding to reading the newspapers, etc. And we sometimes say, I'm living in my own bubble, I'm trying to keep myself distant from what is happening. And yes, that's important, but it's a question that we always ask ourselves, are we pushing ourselves to become so distant from reality, or in some cases numbing ourselves so we don't even get involved in the solution, basically? And I think actually we need to actually read and listen, and it's something I push myself to be, because it's very easy to get to drown basically in the day-to-day operations and in the day-to-day running of the business and the survival of the business, and becomes a secondary thing of remembering that we actually have a civic duty. And this I had to learn also along, to give time to these, like to my work, for example, joining an NGO or joining any of the activities around, on top of the challenges that we have, because we need to be, and as Zena said, we need to be involved in the new policies that are there. But to be involved, you really need to be not just, you need to be also aware of what is happening, what went wrong before, learning also the political part of it in order to be able to really be part of the reform. I think that's important. We tend to forget that.
I think that's a really important point. It's not, you're not isolating yourselves from it. Don't have it on a constant stream, because that's just too much. But be aware, be engaged, and how important it is for the business community to really be engaged and actually be active in pushing these things through. Thank you. I'm going to come back to the panel later. We've got a couple more questions to ask them before we leave. But I'm conscious that you, the audience, have been extremely patient and listened to us talking. And this is supposed to be an interactive session. We're really interested to hear from you, both your questions, but also your thoughts on what can be done and how things can be made to change. So we're going to go over to the audience for some questions or comments, both online and live. So I'm going to compare the live questions and comments, and Alex is going to be on the screens looking at the online comments, and we're going to alternate them. So over to you. Would love to hear from your thoughts, your reflections, or your questions for the panel. Ryan. Do we have some microphones? Yep, there. If you give us a sec, we'll just get someone to come down.
Does everyone hear me? Okay. So basically, I just want to say thank you, James, for the great presentation and for the amazing interventions by all the panelists. I just want to add and go back to your presentation on what with regards to the critical priorities. Yes, we do need a government, but upon the formation of the government, we need an economic plan. We cannot do anything if we do not have a vision for this country. And we have never had an economic plan, actually. An economic plan that sets the vision, guides us, and because you cannot even do a budget reform if you don't have an economic plan. You cannot undertake any structural reform if you do not have an economic plan. So here I want to say thank you, James, for shedding light on the fact that we at the Ministry of Economy and Trade are doing a lot of things, but with the very, very, very limited space that we have. In fact, we have published an economic plan with the support of DFID, and this economic plan does not only shed light on the challenges that the Lebanese economy is facing, but also on the pillars of reform that are needed to kickstart this economy. Not just kickstart it, transform it from a rentier economy into a competitive, innovative economy. And actually, the World Bank has supported us because the pillars of reform do not only cover normal reforms, they actually cover trade, monetary policies, trade policies, and the business environment, So what I think needs to be done is that upon the formation of the government, an economic plan needs to be adopted in order to guide the whole process. I really insist on this point. So yes, this is a critical priority. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a very good point, Ryan. We'll come back to the audience for questions in a sec. But before we do, I think you're absolutely right. And that was another thing that came out of the sessions that we ran with some of our SMEs, was the need for a vision. Knowing where you're going and how you're going to get there, and having some certainty and somewhere that you're aiming for is so important, both for the government to actually be able to take action, but also for the private sector to know where the direction of travel is, to have some certainty to enable them to make investment decisions. I'm going to ask if the panel has any reactions to that. I'll start with Alex. As I know that you've been involved in the economic plan, and to get any reflections that you have on that.
Yeah, of course, and it's really good to hear that it's been a useful product and it kind of sets the agenda. I think the challenge that we come back to remains implementation, and it remains political ownership and delivery of that plan. When we worked with the ministry and helped support that plan, what we were really keen was for it to be inclusive, and the ministry engaged with other ministries, and it became a kind of collective government product. And it was making really good progress before government resignation last year. So for us and I think others within the international community, the focus continues to be on that implementation. So how do you take the plans on the shelf, the plans that are being delivered or produced, and actually implement them and deliver those changes?
good to hear us coming back to delivery again. Anyone else from the panel want to comment on that? Okay. Thank you, Ryan. For those online who didn't hear that, Ryan was saying that the plan didn't cost anything, so it didn't cost the millions of dollars that previous plans have cost, and there is an action plan detailing what needs to happen and when to be given to whoever is going to be responsible for delivery, so they know what needs to be done and how it needs to get done. I'm going to go over to Alex now, see if you have any questions or observations from the online participants.
So not yet. So please do keep your kind of questions and comments coming. I do have a question for the other panelists, but perhaps let's go back to the audience before I do that.
Great, thanks, Alex. And do encourage any of you online, if you have any questions or if you want to make any observations, do let us know. Down on the front row. If you wait, we'll get you a microphone. It's on its way. Here we go.
Sorry. I'm Talal Hijazi from the Association of Lebanese Industrialists. Sorry to say that we submit our policy paper and our advocacy paper to the previous government and to the resigned government regarding the industry in Lebanon and the productive sectors. But at the end, they didn't take in consideration any clause from this policy paper, and now we're doing the role of firefighter. Now we don't want subsidized diesel oil. We don't want anything subsidized. We want to work. We want to export. We want to bring fresh money from abroad. Unfortunately, they gave $900 million for subsidizing. Let's say the basket from the ministry, but at the end it's gone in the wrong way. Only what we need as productive sectors to release our money from the bank. We have money. We don't want any grants. We have our money in dollars in our bank, and believe me, let us use our money to bring to buy our raw material, and then this will move all the economy in Lebanon. Believe me, because if the industry is moving, that's mean all the other sectors will move. It's not. We are not only talking about the industry. That's what happened till now. We are now developing an export policy. At the end, we don't want to forgive, because till now, during the COVID-19 and these 2 years, believe me, there's a lot of industrialists that have been done a product development, product improvement, even without electricity, even without diesel, and they are doing our corrective, let's say, or corrections on the wages for to keep our brain here, not to export our brain. But at the end, we are fighting. We are doing the role of firefighting now. And as association, like Zena said, we are gathering all what the industry needs, and we're trying to go through the, let's say, official channels, and we're going to bring what is good for the industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Talal. And really important work being done by the ALI. I think you also raised some really, really important points there that as we saw from the presentation, people are finding ways around. They're thinking of new and innovative things. They just need to be able to finance it, and finance is going to be absolutely crucial to this. So thank you to the ALI for all your efforts. Thank you also to the ALI for the input that you gave to the paper that we produced, and do keep hold of those plans, because hopefully very soon you will be able to actually get something done about them. Alex, anything else from online, or should we take another question from the audience, or do you want to address your question to the panel?
Sure. Let's do both. So there's a comment here from Marwan, which is about I think the kind of disconnect between the private sector and NGOs. So I think the point is around NGOs not necessarily accepting people from the private sector in terms of recruitment of jobs, but I think probably there's also a broader point there around how do you get more effective collaboration between local charities and international charities and the private sector, which is clearly part of how do you build this inclusive voice going forwards. I guess my point to the panel is, what more can the international community be doing? I mean, we talked a bit about the IMF. Clearly, there are pressures within the international community. Many countries are dealing with the implications of COVID. That has placed pressures on international community budgets. But clearly, when we're talking about something like the LEEP program, which has been a collaboration between the UK and various partners, it'd be good to know what the panel think about what more in the context would they like to see from the international community. And that could be around programs, but it also could be in terms of leadership and pressure on the government.
Thanks, Alex. Zaina, do you want to start answering that? I mean, your perspective from the World Bank's view. I mean, you see a lot of the donor governments, and what would you think that they could be doing?
Yes, thanks, James, and thanks, Alex, for these questions. So actually, there are really limits to what the international community can do in the absence of reforms. So. I mean, there's a lot of technical assistance that the government, that the international community is providing, and there are also a lot of financial support that is also, I mean, being provided, especially after the blast. So, for example, right after the blast, the World Bank, the EU, and the UN, they did this 3RF. They developed the Recovery, Reforms, and Reconstruction Framework, and that prioritizes and identifies what are the needed. Sorry, I hear echo.
You're back. We lost you briefly, but you're back.
Okay, sorry about that. So. I was saying that after the explosion, the World Bank, EU, and the UN, they developed this Recovery, Reforms, and Reconstruction Framework, the 3RF, which identifies what are the priority needs along 4 pillars, including one pillar that's related to jobs and economic opportunities. It's a costed program, and it's a roadmap for the coming 2 years. Now, after developing the framework, the World Bank established a pooled financing fund, which is called the Lebanon Financing Facility. And the objective of this Lebanon Financing Facility is to receive funds from the donors and to implement some of the priorities that have been identified under the 3RF. We started receiving money from donors, and we recently approved the project in early August. That is called the Building Beirut Businesses Back and Better, the B5 Fund. It's a $25 million project that is supported with the generous contributions of donors. And this is to support damaged businesses and the microfinance industry in Lebanon. There are also other projects in the pipeline. Hopefully, we aim, to have around $100 and $200 million of grants over the course, over the life of the Lebanon Financing Facility. We also have other programs at the bank, and we have been restructuring, following the COVID, a number of our projects. We restructured another project that is supporting the private sector, which is called ISME, to allow the manufacturing sector to produce locally medical supplies and PPEs. We have the vaccination program. We have restructured recently also roads and employment. However, I understand that this is, of course, way below the scale that is required. But there is really, this is the maximum that the international community can be doing in the absence of reforms, in the absence of a macro stabilization program that really sets the path, the debt sustainability path into the right way and puts the government into a right path of reforms. We have been also providing, not only us, many also other donors have been providing a lot of financial support and technical assistance to different ministries and on different topics. Yeah, that's it from my side. Thanks, and over to you, James and Alex.
Thank you, Sena. That's really helpful. I think one of the things I'd like to pick out of that is what you said about the response to the blast and the power and the value of multilateral coordinated action. So understanding as a collective group of donors what the priorities are, and then financing that through one central multilateral pot that can then be delivered. I think that's really interesting. One of the observations I have on this is it would be great to see much closer and better coordination between the various different donors as well as NGOs to ensure that that all priorities are being met, and it's not just sort of the fad of the moment and everybody's doing the same thing. So I think having that multilateral coordinated response is really important. Naji, I wonder if you had any thoughts on what the international community can be doing, as a receiver of international support through LEEP funds. What do you think could be being done?
Look, the first and foremost, I mean, I don't want to get into it, but I think you must hold Lebanese politicians accountable. Okay, this is critical. And along the same token, if you get tired of Lebanon, don't subcontract it to others, such as our dear neighbor. Okay. And go the distance when you say you're supporting Lebanon. You know, Macron comes to Lebanon, all expectations, France is here to save us, bunch of BS. They don't want to go the distance. So, but, you know, on a more commercial level, because I could talk about politics for a long time, and we should not blame others, obviously. We are the ones to be blamed as Lebanese, I say, and it starts with education, beyond anything. But on a commercial level, James, so we're members of a group called UVL, Union des Vins du Liban. Okay, there are taxes that Lebanese wine is subjected to when it's exported to Europe. Okay, but we don't get subsidies that the European farmers get. So on one hand, we're treated because of this European trade deal that we have along on the same platform as the Europeans, but we don't get subsidies that the farmers get in France, for example. But yet we pay taxes in France and in the UK, and UK farmers get the subsidies. The other thing, I think, as a financier, I've always backed businesses where there is a major know-how, where the management is knowledgeable, has a track record, etc. So when the donors come to Lebanon and want to back a business, it's critical that the managers know what they're doing. And in some sectors, such as technology sector, that becomes a global business. It's you're competing against somebody in Silicon Valley or in Singapore or next door to us in Israel. So I think it's critical that the funds that are deployed in Lebanon, they back, let's say, European that provide such technology know-how. So a long time ago, there was supposed to be a tech park in Damour, where it was supposed to be partially financed by the Lebanese and partially by US tech firms. Okay, I think this will be critical to bring groups like Intel and like AMD, others with such expertise to Lebanon and back them. It's so much better than backing a Lebanese guy who worked at a semiconductor company in the US and wants to start a firm in Lebanon. You know, because then so many business hurdles will be circumvented this way. So, and that was, you know, Ireland, obviously, Ireland is a case in point. You know what happened in Ireland? And the World Bank can talk about it forever, and, you know, they offered incentives and they invited these huge firms globally to come and invest in Ireland. But they offered the huge incentives because they didn't have money. They offered free land. They offered tax holidays for 20 years. And that was the reason why Ireland, and they offered a very educated population. Okay. So I really think Lebanon can take models that have been successful overseas and recreate them in Lebanon. Ireland is one such case in point. and it starts with an educated workforce that's very humble. Voila, I mean, James, I think this covers most of what you were asking for.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Najee. I think the few things that I'd like to draw out of that, the first is that helping Lebanese companies by actually ensuring a level playing field for them, helping them, be able to access markets by removing some of the barriers that may exist internationally for them, sharing know-how, whether that's through programs like the Damour Tech Hub, or actually encouraging FDI and encouraging foreign companies to invest in Lebanon. It's interesting you raised the Ireland example. I mean, yes, there was a lot of that was about incentives, but it was also about how Ireland used their expat population and how they tapped into senior executives in firms who are Irish or of Irish heritage. And I think there's a real opportunity to do that here as well, and tap into those expat networks. Before we go back to the audience, just finally, your thoughts on the question about what the international community can do.
Yeah, I hope I'm not repetitive, but there's one point that is specifically on the point of grants. To make sure that the grants are going through the right channels. Instead of, for example, directing grants towards baskets or towards cash vouchers that actually have a counterproductive, in my opinion, effect on the working population. But to actually, we've seen a lot of, I think, and LEEP is one of the programs that proves that once if these grants go towards SMEs or the private sector, and they have certain KPIs that they need to hit, or they're provided in addition to the grants technical assistance through them, they end up going to salaries or to the. I mean, it's the same end result, but with a better or more proper channel that ensures that it is in place, basically.
So thinking very carefully when giving grants, making sure they're going to the right people in the right mechanisms with the right incentives to encourage good behaviors. I think that's really, really important. Thank you. Back to the audience. Man in the suit with the mask. No, yes. This here. Thank you. Sorry, with the mask, I don't always recognize people. So.
Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Ricardo Hosri. I am the chairman of the Family Business Network Levant, and I am the coordinator of the Survival of the Private Sector working group at RDCL, Rassemblement de Chefs d'Entreprise Libanais, which is the Business People Association. I'm also a Lebanon lover, a change seeker, and an activist. I want to thank you, James, Alex, and the panelists for all the inputs that you brought and the studies and the findings that you gave. And I share and I align with each one of you. And I want to pick up on 2 points that you mentioned, the political will and the necessity to be involved in politics to reach that change. I want to assure you of one thing. Over the past 2 years, it has been proven that there is no political will, and that in Lebanon, there is no will to make of Lebanon or give at least Lebanon the opportunity to reach the potential it could. And this is certain. The second thing is the absolute necessity of being involved in politics, because each one of us here is here because he is interested somehow in the country, in solutions, and especially in the private sector. The private sector has moved from survival mode 2 years ago to today being directly attacked. And the numbers that have been shared by Ms. Khouri from the World Bank show how many companies and how many small businesses have closed over the past 2 years, how many unemployed, and still ongoing. In terms of recommendations and collaboration, I can assure you that they have thousands, if not tens of thousands of studies and recommendations on their desks, and they did not use any of them. And the last one is your own, which was distributed to us this morning. If they only pick up one page of this and start with one reform, I'm sure it will make a huge difference. But there is no political will, and they don't want. Today, the private sector is being directly attacked on a daily basis, whether with the fuels Now with the port situation where we cannot import nor export because of course, the corruption and whatever is made by the judicial system at all levels, it is impossible to do business in Lebanon anymore. And if we are still here trying to do business, it is because we are proud people and because we still believe that we can do something. Today, I will take it to a different dimension. Of course, the private sector, we all agree that it is the most productive sector in Lebanon and probably the only productive sector in Lebanon. And I want to put it in balance with the public sector. So at this level, when I say we have to move from the survival mode to the civil resistant mode, we have to look at the two sectors as two opposite sectors. We have to, in our opinion, as good Lebanese, break the public sector, which has paralyzed our institutions, disabled all kind of functional economy, and today is hitting on the only surviving sector, which is the private sector. So today we make the shift from the survival mode to the civil resistant mode, where we have to break the public sector, which belongs to us indirectly, to save the institutions and to rebuild it on good grounds. And in my opinion, after 2 years of trying, by all means, with collaborating with governments, people in charge, so-called responsible civil servants, it has been proven that whatever we propose, they do the opposite. And this is what led us to where we are today. So my call to you is that please accept, whether you are a civil servant, a good one. If you are here, it means that you are capable and you are a good one. And we have many of them, but there are as much, if not more, non-functional. I call upon you to make it a duty for us to save the private sector by breaking the public sector, to recuperate the institutions and rebuild the country the way we know how to do it, based on governance, transparency, and all the recommendations that have been done here. We cannot still remain inactive. We cannot just count the deaths and count the closures and see people seeking opportunities for nothing elsewhere, where we have all these capabilities. We, of course, rely a lot on our diaspora, but we cannot rely on them. We are not mendiants. We are productive people. We have all the capabilities. All it takes is to understand that this system doesn't work, and that today the only thing that remains and wants to maintain employment, and we are doing everything possible to employ and keep our employed in place, is the private sector. So let's save the private sector. Let's head directly on the public sector, recuperate it, and then start rebuilding our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think very important words there. A round of applause from the audience. I think the need to vote, the need to make your voice heard, the need to take action is absolutely critical. And it's very difficult when you're running a business in this kind of crisis. As you said, we're in survival mode. For many people, just being able to keep their SME going is absorbing all their energy. And I think, as you said, taking yourself out of that, making the time to actually make change happen is really, really important. It's very difficult to do when you're wondering how you're going to pay next month's wage bill, whether the bank's going to give you enough money to be able to buy the materials that you need to bring in. But making that time, both as individuals and as SME owners, to take action is really, really important. I think another important point you raised is that politicians work for us. They are elected by the people. They do not have a right to be in parliament. They are elected, and it's time that they woke up to that fact and they realize that they are here to serve, not to rule. Hang on, Dorian, can you just wait for the microphone?
I just want to make a very small comment in reply to his very nice speech. I I work for the Ministry of Economy and Trade, yes, but I'm a very, very, very firm believer that the private sector needs to be the driver of growth in this Lebanese economy. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to do anything. And as long as I'm working for this ministry,
you stay and
I can't
you want. Alex, I'm wondering, have we got any other questions from the online?
Yeah, I'm here. So I lost you for
okay.
a second there. Hello. So we got
just wondering if any other.
We do have. I'm just going to keep talking, and hopefully the internet catches up. So we've got a few comments. A really important one from our good friend Alia Mubayed, reflecting on Naji's comments around the EU kind of access to EU markets under the association agreement. You know, in a kind of system where you had a functioning government and proactive policymakers, really they should have been using the fact that there was a balance of payments crisis to engage with the EU and others about suspending some of the provisions of the agreement in order to support Lebanese businesses more. So I think that's a very important point. There's kind of one question about the healthcare sector in particular, and it'd be great to hear people's views on that. Clearly, the health sector is suffering like no other time and needs immediate action and support. So perhaps one question to the panel is, what tangible actions could be taken on the healthcare sector? And I think particularly in the absence of a government, so with a caretaker government, what are the useful actions that can be done to shore up the health sector, which really is in crisis at the moment?
Alex, do you want to take a first stab at that question, and then we can broaden it out?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really difficult question. It's difficult to know where to start, to be honest. Clearly, you need leadership from the Ministry of Health. There needs to be better collaboration between the government and across the whole healthcare system. Fundamentally, one key issue is fuel. So it goes beyond healthcare. You need a more comprehensive plan for sustainable sources of electricity and fuel that the economy runs on, and the healthcare sector needs in particular. I think there needs to be collaboration with the international community on things like COVID vaccination going forward. So really, it's not something that can be fixed in isolation. It's part of the whole system of accountable, transparent, responsible leadership and a bigger set of reforms.
I don't know anyone else from the panel. Yusra, as a logistics person, I know a certain amount of healthcare challenges about logistics. I don't know if you've got any thoughts. Don't feel obliged.
No, but perhaps also it's because it's linked basically to the accessibility of the imports and the facilitation of the imports, basically, and having that process also be transparent, and also like whatever that is coming in, to have transparency on where it's going and making sure that it falls in the right hands.
I think that's good points. I think I don't think we've necessarily got a specialist panel on healthcare, so I don't know, Naji or Zainab, if you want to add anything, please do. If not, then happy to.
Used to be, James, I used to be the chairman of Hôpital de la Tour in Geneva at some point, and we used to have tons of doctors from Lebanon. Lebanon has a huge supply of doctors and healthcare specialists. Today, again, I go back to the perception of risk and security. Today, Lebanon, had it been perceived as a stable place, can attract lots and lots of patients from all over the world. And it can bring tons of fresh dollars because it's got the skills. But that window of opportunity is closing very, quickly. The UK, as you know, you have a huge waiting list to go and get operated on at an NHS hospital. And the same thing here in Switzerland. The window of opportunity is closing very quickly because everybody is in need of medical nurses and they're being hunted. Canada today has opened the door for Lebanese nurses. You apply, you get a job immediately in Canada, in Montreal area, Quebec. So again, I go back to that notion of stability and perception. We need to fix that mindset very quickly. We need to stabilize the country very quickly. Because so many people have gone back to Lebanon and they've left and then they've gone back again, but now they've left. Will they go back again if, after the second or third time? I don't think so. Sorry.
So we're back to the desperate need for stability to backstop the crisis, to provide some kind of future vision and to help stop the brain drain. So I don't know if you want to add anything?
Yes, thanks, James. So I just want to say a few things on the pharma industry. So I think what is critical now for the pharmaceutical for the pharma industry is trade finance. I mean, ensuring first on the immediate term that they have access to foreign dollars to import medicine and medical supplies, and of course to fix the problem of the pricing, because I think the issue of pricing is now the main problem, and here the Ministry of Public Health is the regulator of the prices. This is number one. Number two, I think we have a very good base of local companies. We have, I think, 12 pharmaceutical companies in Lebanon that manufacture local drugs, generic or under licensing by international companies. And I really think there's a great opportunity to increase their production, whether to also, enter into new drugs or to expand the drugs that they are also, scale up their production of local drugs and export. Again, contract manufacturing is really very important. I think it touches on the point of attracting a foreign investment. But while understanding also the caution of a foreign investor to come to Lebanon in such a situation, so doing such types of non-equity modes of investment and getting those types of contracts, licensing, contract manufacturing with international companies, I think is critical, and we already have a few cases that we can build on. And I really think also, important maybe later on for the government to focus, public procurement of drugs and other policies on supporting local generics. Also, these are like a few points I can think of right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Zaina. So I think that the first and foremost is getting access to dollars for importers, very, very clear, and fixing the pricing. But then both in the shorter and the longer term, encouraging local manufacturing, both encouraging buying of local generics, but also encouraging contract manufacturing and supporting what has the potential to be a very strong sector in the economy. So thank you. One last question from the audience, and then I want to switch gears slightly, and rather than talking about the problems, talk a little bit about the reasons for hope. And I'd love to hear from the audience on that as well. So I want you to start thinking about what you think are your reasons for hope. This man at the back in the white shirt, you've been waiting for a while, so.
Thank you. I learned first.
Sorry, can you just introduce yourself first?
Yeah, this is okay.
Great.
Yeah. So English comes fourth in my learning experience because I learned.
You can ask in French or in Arabic if you like.
I learned Lebanese, Senegalese, French, and then English.
Wow.
So I want to use this, this metaphor of the colibri. There is this forest burning, and that bird is bringing just a small volume of water, and people ask him, how come you are wanting to do anything with this forest burning? Okay, I'm just carrying what I can, and the other will do. In a spirit of solidarity, like solidarity with environment, creation employment, wages that are not too far from each other within this micro enterprise, and so and so, and local purchasing, and so and so. So this circular economy and so. So we try to raise our funds from our friends from diaspora, and we already helped 6-7 micro enterprise, and I can just testify that there are marvelous people in Lebanon, there are beautiful people in Lebanon, there are competent people in Lebanon, and please, you can hope on Lebanon.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your support, and do have a wander around there's lots of you who love you to meet and to talk to during the day, so thank you. I'm going to ask now for your reasons for hope, and I'll come back to the panel last on this, but anyone from the audience who wants to share your reasons for hope, for what you think, what gives you hope that we are looking at a better future? Yes. Gentleman in the suit and the purple tie in the middle of the front row, we get a...
First of all, really thank you for LEEP for supporting us financially in this critical situation. So really thank you. Second, I came to Lebanon 3 years ago. I was 18 years abroad in Africa and in GCC, and I came in Lebanon because I believe in it. I believe that whatever small you are, whatever small business you start, we can do it. And the only problem that we have is that we are not used to work together. We can see worldwide that there are so many Lebanese that are very successful, but individuals, no groups. This is what we need to do now. And this is what I would like to ask everybody, whether it is LEEP, whether it is NGO, whether whatever it is, that I am a small factory. I do such a good products, but now nobody can buy it because we don't have anymore the capacity as Lebanese to buy it. So as it is supplementary product, I believe in Lebanon there are so many potentials even now. Even now, because now is the best time for an SME to start. Now is the best time. It has never been easier for an SME to start now in Lebanon. And I believe in Lebanon, and I'm staying in Lebanon.
Fantastic, wonderful reasons for hope, and do take advantage of the day-to-day to meet with people to build that collective action.
That's for sure.
Brilliant.
That's for sure.
Thank you for your thoughts. Yes, wait for the gentleman in the black shirt.
Hi everyone, I'm Charbel Shamiyi. I'm reading notes of my phone so I don't lose ideas, I'm sorry. I'm an exhibitor and beneficiary of LEEP. My father created the work, and it's sustainable and a breakthrough in its domain. While reforms, mainly governmental, are crucial, they are distant and will take years, while we are suffering from an economic collapse on all levels. Despite the crisis, in the past 2 years, my company has thrived. We improved on all levels. However, I find myself unable to grow further. Our factory runs on 50% solar panels. The remaining are essential for continuous efficiency. We are also looking into distributing our products in electric vehicles. Both of these investments are long shot with no loans, no banking system, the international community decreasing funds because of the global pandemic. My point is, imagine wanting to work and not being able to. It's the #1 driver for leaving. But I'm still giving a shot. So to my fellow private sector owners, approach me if you know of any loaning opportunity, any way of collaboration, for exporting, for working together, because people like you are keeping me here. And Naji, I would love to meet you in person. Thank you.
Thank you, Shahbab. Very, very encouraging words. And do again use the opportunity of the day to meet people and to see if you can get access to those funds. I think a really wonderful story of innovation from Shahbab and his father. It's in our book of stories, so you get to read about that if you get a chance. Just before we close off and hand over to Irakli, I'd like to go back to the panel and get their final thoughts on what gives you hope. And so I'll come to you with Zaina, and then Alex, then Naji, then Yusuf. Zaina, can you hear us? Oh, I think you
sorry.
may be on
I
mute.
thought you were going to start with Yusuf because I got disconnected for a while.
Oh, there we go.
So maybe this is a cliche, but I mean, Lebanon has gone through a lot previously. Yes, nothing at this scale, but it was
Sorry, we start starting with you. Your reasons for hope.
I'm sorry, can you hear me? James, can you hear me? I think I lost the connection again.
I can hear you. I think we lost
Zaina,
it.
I think you're cutting out a bit. Maybe we come back to you if the connection improves. So
I can hear you now. I don't know if we keep on losing you. I mean, online, James. Okay, I'll wait for.
with us. Your reasons for hope. Naji, I think you may be on mute. If you give us your reasons for why you're still hopeful and you're seeing a way out of the crisis.
Are you talking to me?
Yes, we're about to close. We're just your closing thoughts on what gives you reasons for hope.
Look, very quickly, very quickly. First of all, the Lebanese debt burden is now the current market value of the Lebanese debt burden. Let's say global debt burden is less than $10 billion. I don't know the exact number, but our debt is so reduced. Number two, we have the most qualified workforce and the highest per capita skilled labor, definitely in the region and definitely in the greater region, MENA, and maybe some of the most educated people in the world. And I emphasize education here. That if I were running the country, that would be my #1 target. Number three, and I don't want to put it as a cliche, but every single time I have visitors to Lebanon, I take them to Nahar al-Kalb and show them how over thousands of years we've had invaders, one after the other, from Nebuchadnezzar to Alexander the Great to Cyrus the Persian. And I cite the Persian specifically to say that he's come and left. And look, bottom line is, and I don't want to hear it anymore because it bothers me to say it, but we are a resilient group of people. Now, I want the recovery to happen in my years so I can enjoy my few remaining years in Lebanon, in the mountains, in Hamdoun. And honestly, I have a lot of hope because every one of my kids, my 4 kids, want to register to vote. And by the way, we need to know how to do that because it's still very unknown. And even my 96-year-old mother says, the next election, I'm voting for the first time. And I will take the entire neighborhood from Hazmiye to vote. That's what gives me reason to hope.
Thank you, Naji. A very hopeful message. I look forward to joining you up in the hills in Hamdoun for a sundowner in years to come. Alex, are you back on, or Zaina? I think we're still Alex. Yes.
I can just about still hear you. Sorry, I missed Naji again. All right, so I'll just say a couple of things. So I think one is this diaspora and the kind of global connections that Lebanese people and Lebanese businesses have. Clearly, that's. Can you hear me, James?
Yep, we can hear you. That's great.
Okay. So clearly clearly it's struggling at the moment, but that gives me hope going forward. Those global connections are going to be crucial in terms of supporting the businesses of today develop and grow. Lebanon still has a really educated population. It has good expertise in tradable services. So I see there is hope and potential there. I'd also say about climate change and renewables. So the government have put forward a relatively ambitious agenda and commitment on climate change and renewables. Clearly that needs to be implemented and delivered by the government. But I do see lots of potential in Lebanon as a country for shifting into renewables, and we talked about solar already. So those couple of things I'd say.
Thank you, Alex. Very exciting news on the renewables front. Zaina, are you able to give us your thoughts?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Perfect, that's much better, thank you.
Okay, so actually I don't have much to add to what has been said. I mean, yes, Lebanon has gone through a lot previously, and still it was able to rise again. I don't take visitors to Nahar al-Kalb, but I also keep on telling the story. Now, of course, this is with a big if. The challenges related to policy formulation and consensus building are addressed. So we can put Lebanon again on a sustainable path. Second, I think with every opportunity comes, with every crisis comes opportunity. The unofficial devaluation, I think, created a very good opportunity for Lebanon, whether for exports or import substitution, whether it's also goods and services. So according to our survey, we saw that a fair number of firms were able to increase their exports. Half were in the manufacturing sector, particularly food, machinery, and some in retail and ICT. Cheaper and talented labor force, as mentioned by previous panelists. Also, the growth of the digital economy in Lebanon, diaspora and its networks, and really the creativity and the entrepreneurship spirit of Lebanese. This is basically what gives me hope that there could be a better future for Lebanon if there is, of course, a political will.
Thank you, Zaina. And yeah, it's really good to hear some very concrete sectors that there really is potential. And a lot of those, we've seen a number of those sectors represented in our LEEP grantees. Finally, last but definitely not least, Yossa, your thoughts on what gives you hope?
I still have a lot of faith in the fellow entrepreneurs and the fellow Lebanese in general. And I mean, just the audience here gives just a representation, like what the gentleman just said, and his business story, the other business stories that are out there, the people that are doing something out of absolutely nothing, basically. I have a lot of faith in that. And like I invite everyone that still feels that they can have an impact, even if it's small, even if it's like that, a small bird that I mean, at the end of the day, we have a collective love for Lebanon, but love is an action, actually. And it's also due for us, even in the most difficult of times. So as long as we can still make impact, I'm one of those that are staying.
Thank you, and I'm very glad to hear that. And I have, just to add to my thoughts as well, I mean, the thing that has kept me getting out of bed, kept me here, kept me going, is the incredible energy, entrepreneurialism, the adaptability of the SMEs that I'm working with. Every day I get up with a smile on my face. I think I've got the best job in the world. It's fantastic to see the energy and the ability and the capability of all the SMEs that we've worked with. And that's what gives me hope. I want to close the panel session there. A huge thanks to our wonderful distinguished panelists, to Zaina, for participation and the really helpful insights that you've shared. So thank you all very much. It gives me, thanks, you said. It gives me, you can stay if you like, because we're going to, but if you'd rather sit in the audience, please do so. It's probably more comfortable. Yes, if you could turn your Wi-Fi off, apparently that might be what's interfering with the signal in certain points. So if you could do that, that would be great. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Irakli Matkava, former Minister of Economy in Georgia, who was helped drive through a number of the doing business reforms in Georgia, which turned it into a top performer in the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business rankings. The first time I met him was over the reforms that were made in Georgia. So also, look, there is always opportunity. Hi, Irakli. Welcome. I was just telling everyone how wonderful you were. So I hope you're not blushing with embarrassment.
Hi, James. I hope you guys can hear me.
Over to you.
I didn't hear almost any of that, so I might ask you to repeat that in person later, so that I know what you think of me. Can you hear me? Am I audible? James?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good.
Yes, we can hear you perfectly. Thanks.
Thank you so much for giving me opportunity to speak. Today was great first session that I could listen in, and couldn't help but listen with a bit of a sad smile, if you wish, because for one, I just couldn't help myself but remember pretty much these conversations in Georgia about 15, 20 years ago. It could be easily exactly the same thing, word in word, more or less. And I think, we might have those conversations in Georgia sometime in the future if we don't change some of the things that we're doing now. So, topic of great importance of me, and also familiarity. And indeed, there are a lot of things similar between Lebanon and Georgia, and I think in good way as well. It was mentioned that Lebanon is a small country, so is Georgia, and when you're small, you can change fast, and you can do a lot with a small amount of effort if it's focused in a right way. So I'm really happy to sense the energy and need for change that's clearly abundantly present in Lebanon, and I hope that everything's going to be fine. What I will try to do, and for that I believe I need to do a small operation of sharing a presentation with you. And I hope it works. I'll try to speak about our experience and what can be interesting for Lebanon at this stage. What are some of the lessons learned that we have? And this is not to say that anybody, Lebanon or anybody else, should do exactly as we did, but rather possibly we can be a point of reference in the things that we did right and in the things that we did wrong over time, and it can be helpful in a way. So I'll try to be brief, and then if there are any questions, of course, I'll be more than happy to attend to them as well. If you go back to Georgia of roughly 15, 16 years ago, you will find a thoroughly corrupt country where everything is bought and sold, and not because you can, but because you have to. That's the only way to operate, whether you're a person or a business. You're a country out of Soviet Union for about 10 years, a country that went through civil war, 2 breakaway secessionist wars with the help of our great big neighbor and friend Russia. We have, and in many ways, we are in much worse positions than Lebanon. Nobody in the world knows anything about Georgia. If they know anything, they know that it's a terrible place, the post-Soviet one. We have no prior positive experience or knowledge of anything. We're just out of Soviet Union. We just know that, and then all the chaos that followed on. So, well, we're kind of clueless and in a very bad shape. And the state, I mean, we are a failing state. I mean, it's bad enough that it charges for identity documents. When I had to get my first international passport, I remember going to the police station because it was police then giving it, and they told me that I seemed like a nice young man, but the problem was that there was shortage of blank passports. But if I could make an effort of finding $300 for them, they could make an effort to find a passport for me. Instead of what I did, I called my father, who found a friend who helped me to find a passport for $100. And I mean, there was no surprise to anyone. So even a very basic service the state provides, identity documents, right? ID, well, you had to buy it. And $300 in 2000 in Georgia was a year's budget. Not really many people could, so to speak, afford it. So it was that bad. And you dial 9 years, and in 2009, The Economist publishes an article entitled Georgia's Mental Revolution, where it kind of praises us for the great things we have done. And the kind of key comment it makes there is that, you know what, Georgians are no longer surprised that they can, do so well. And I think that's a key thing, because 10 years earlier in Georgia, we thought that, there was no way out. I mean, we were doomed, and nothing good could ever come out of us. And yeah, corruption was a way to live, and I mean, it was a purely Georgian thing, and nobody else was suffering from that. And in 2009, 79% of the people surveyed disagreed that corruption is a natural occurrence in the life. And that was massive. That was massive. And on the next couple of slides, you can see how essentially massive that was. What you see here is two surveys from IFC and from Transparency International, who were surveying year after year the corruption situation in Georgia. And you can see that to get things done, 70% of people said that they had to, pay bribe. In 2008, it was only 4%. In terms of corruption perception, globally, we were at 127 in 2003 and 51 in 2012. In some other rankings, and this is just to show the scale, the sheer scale of transformation in a very short amount of time. So we had to introduce the reforms. The ease of doing business was probably one of the big successes. We were somewhere close to the bottom. We were number 8 in 2013. I think in 2008 we were already in top 20 or something like that. GDP per capita quadrupled. The economy got all better, etc. So a failing state became a kind of a poster child of transformation and, of the right way of doing things and the progress and economic growth and, having right economic policy in place, etc. So how did we manage to pull it off? We are still surprised that we did. But then in retrospect, when we looked at it, we kind of were able to distill some of the key things that probably helped us in achieving those results. Overall, the approach was counterintuitive and not advised at that time. We kind of went for less is more. So rather than having a big anti-corruption program or a package of well-written and designed policies for this and that, we kind of went the exact opposite way. We started to cut things and get rid of things and eliminate things and delete things, and that was a kind of soup de jour at that point in time. If you look at the key implementation principles, I think the 3 points can be made here. One is leadership, and it was said enough about the political will and the leadership and the need for that in Lebanon as well. And we have found, or as one of the architects of Georgian reforms had said, actually, it takes 3 people to pull off reforms in a country. You need a visionary, that is a person who understands what needs to be done. You need the champion, that is a person who sells it to public, and you need to sell it to public very aggressively because, reforms are painful. with no exception. And then you need the enforcer. That's the person who punishes deviation from the new course. And those sticks are just as necessary as the carrots. And if you don't really have those three people, or three groups of people, or whichever configuration you're going to end up having, it's going to be really hard to have any sustainable success in terms of reform. The second lessons that we learned, and we are still learning it now, essentially, as a process, is that you win as a system or you fail as a system. You cannot pick and choose 2 or 3 areas to reform and leave the same as it is, because I mean, it's a closed system. It's a vicious cycle. You change it all, or you don't stand a chance to change anything in particular. And we kind of failed at that. We left parts that were not reformed and unchanged, and we are paying the price now, essentially. And yeah, as I said, I mean, you need sticks and carrots for the civil servants who kind of feel the pain of those reforms on themselves. We did use a lot of support. I mean, one big source of inspiration was, looking at the technologies that was becoming available then in terms of electronic governance and internet and mobile technologies, etc. There was quite a bit of technical assistance, of course, but I think, I mean, important thing to know about technical assistance is that it needs local ownership. The change cannot be done, whatever great advice you get from outside, by outsiders. I mean, it has to be you. You have to be guiding the process. You have to be owning the process. You have to be setting the vision. You cannot take recipes as offered. You have to understand if they're going to fit or not. And we had quite a bit of debates, actually, with the partners that we had those days, among them IMF and World Bank, when we were dramatically reducing tax rates. I mean, IMF thought that we were bunkers, so we would never survive. There would be no money in the budget whatsoever. We didn't agree and ended up being right. But my point is, I mean, it's not always what you're told to do, but really to understand what you need and ask for that. And the international community will be able to give you that, because I mean, there's a lot of knowledge, technical expertise, etc., and resources out there to give you, but you have to understand what you need. You cannot be passive taker. You have to be actively guiding the process. And we did ask around a lot for the best practice. I remember Estonia being a big inspiration, New Zealand, Ireland, which was mentioned here. We're trying to learn from those countries. But again, we're trying to learn from those countries on the level of principles of what they were doing, not really taking systems and trying to copy paste, because I mean, that would just not work. Now, in terms of technical approaches, of technical methods of implementing those reforms, how did we manage to free the system of corruption or opportunities for the corruption, and how to make it more clean, efficient, transparent, customer friendly, if you wish. So there are a few that kind of worked at best. Probably one of the most important methods is silence is consent approach in regulation. What essentially it means that when I apply for something, government has X number of days, a reasonable amount of time to respond to that, whether my paperwork is good enough, if I fit the criteria, etc. And if they don't, it means that the permit, the license, the paper, whatever I need, it is granted after that statutory period of time of 5 days, 7 days, or something has been exhausted. And to write all those, I mean, to make to produce objections or requests for changes, I mean, it takes actually work and time and the intellectual resources of the civil servants. So there's nothing to do. I mean, there's nothing to do, and they just don't write to you, and then you get your permit hassle-free. We changed the service delivery into fee-based service delivery. The services were delivered. I mean, some of the services, or most of the services, were for free, but say in 2 weeks period of time, you could get that piece of paper. But if you wanted overnight, you could pay X amount of money, or if you wanted in 3 days, you could pay a smaller fee, but still get the service quicker, etc. Making sure that the motivation within the public agencies that are providing those services would change a bit as well. because the incomes that they were generating from fee-based services were used to, strengthen those agencies to give out the bonuses to the employees, etc. So that worked beautifully. The next international passport that I had to take, I think 6 years later, I had the choice to get it for free in, I think it was 10 working days, but I went for 3 days, paid something, got my passport. So it worked beautifully. Ex-post licensing was another thing that we did a lot. For many areas of work where the licenses or permits were required, when it was not essential, we said that it's okay to start your operation and acquire your licenses as you go within some period of time, but you didn't really have to work upfront for all the licenses and permits, etc. And then one thing would fall through and all your work, would be wasted. So you could do things as you went. We had a thing called regulatory guillotine. That probably the most important thing we had, legally speaking. Essentially, we said that in some areas, the regulation would be abolished, like altogether. Not replaced, not improved, not changed, not adapted, but as of next month, this area is deregulated. You don't need anything. You don't need a license, you don't need a permit, and we did on massive scale. That was coming from the understanding that even though, the intentions for the regulation was good, it protected someone's safety or whatever interest, what it has turned into was just a corruption exercise. You had to go somewhere and get X number of signatures on X number of papers and spend huge amount of time and money on that without really complying with anything and doing anything. You just, got the paper. So if it was not actually happening, it made no sense to have that regulation. Then some areas were later re-regulated with proper systems and enforcement agencies. But at that point, if it was just serving the sake of corruption, we said that, well, goodbye. This area is completely deregulated. And we also did a lot of what was called piggybacking. That, for example, worked for bringing things into countries that needed to go through some kind of regulatory checks. For example, medicine. Right? You normally have a kind of drug agency that has to accredit that medicine to be used in your country. And that's a time-consuming, expensive, intellectually demanding process. It needs a lot of expertise, which we didn't have. So what we said was that if the developed countries of the world, say US or Japan or European Union countries, think that product is good enough to be placed on their market, and the producer or importer of the product can produce papers that attest to that, it's going to be good in Georgia. It would be approved automatically for the Georgian market as well. And that did save a lot of time and money for lots of people. And importantly, it brought the prices down for those type of goods and services. Because, now they didn't really have to go through the hoops to get the approvals, and there was huge competition that all of a sudden was born out of it. And the competition, of course, pushed the prices lower and made it better for the consumers and customers in the end. There's three major objections that we heard was that coming from the kind of old guard of civil service, but this is how we always have done it, and there's no other way to do it. What you suggest is impossible to do. Or what about the public safety? Those are three most commonly heard objections. But, well, essentially, the approaches that we used that I just kind of explained briefly were the responses to those three objections. And then again, as a practice showed, it worked. And the civil service did indeed eventually change. The three areas which I think were most important for Georgian businesses and SMEs in particular, and might be important for Lebanese ones as well, were taxes, customs, and license and permits at large. And just to give you a flavor of the scale and depths of the change that we introduced, before reforms, we had 26 taxes. It was paperwork flow. It was inspected will principle from the tax authorities. We got it down to 6 taxes with lower rates. We made it completely electronic, the filing, etc. It was risk-based inspection system, and you can imagine the sheer amount of resources that the businesses freed up as a result. And it brought them from shadow economy, because nobody could essentially pay those 26 taxes fully. That was impossible to operate. But the economy was in shadow, and now it could legalize itself, and that was important for them becoming international, etc. Customs is the most difficult area to reform in Georgia. It took the longest because the incentives for corruption are stronger than probably in anything else in customs, and it's very, very tough nut to crack. We had very complex procedures for import and export. It took 52 days and 54 days respectively to go through those procedures. We had 16 different tariffs applied. We got down into a one-stop shop approach: 4 days for import, 5 days for export, 3 tariffs applied. So those 4 days and 5 days then later on, I think even decreased farther. So all of a sudden, trade became a very active area once this was put in place. And I was talking about the regulatory guillotine. From over 900 licenses and permits, at its lowest, we went down to 52. Okay, and all the procedures were replaced with one-stop shops, with silences consent, with fee-based service delivery, etc. So that it really turned into a service rather than a exercise in extorting a bribe for getting a piece of paper. Again, you can imagine the amount of resources that it freed up for the businesses, especially small and medium-sized businesses, because they didn't really have all the connections or all the money and time to deal with the demands of the bureaucracy at that time. Now, it was not easy, but saying that it was not easy doesn't mean that it was impossible to do. It was possible to do. It was possible to do, roughly speaking, the bulk of this was done in 3 years, right? So in a small country with right approach, with the right amount of resources, and those resources are not huge, again, you can pull this off. In Georgia, I assume you can do it in Lebanon as well. To be clear, the civil service is key to this, because eventually that's what needs to change as a result of the reforms. And essentially what happened, what the government had to do was 2 things. One, make the civil service a kind of dignified thing again, because being in civil service meant that you were a crook, not necessarily because you were a bad person and grew up dreaming about being a bribe extorting crook, but that was a system. There was no other way to function in that system. If you entered the system, you had to be part of it. So, you went there, you lived with it, and especially rank and file, who made enough to survive but really never made huge money out of that, they were not happy to be living those lives. They also wanted to do a decent thing and have decent conditions. So we created those. The wages were increased. The merit-based approach instead of cronyism was introduced. They had career growth opportunities. The shabby, terrible government buildings were restored, and they got a decent computer and a desk and smoking area and whatever. It was a nice thing to work in public service. Then it was a nice place to be, and nobody looked at you as somebody who was just there to make their life difficult. But to be clear again, we did prosecute over 2,200 mid to high level civil servants, and those were the ones who refused to kind of change with the rest of the country. And you can say that the customs officers, tax inspectors, and police force kind of leading numbers here, because again, the biggest incomes, high risk, high reward kind of situations there, and lots of people refused to go with the change. So we had to be very strict. This is believed that it came back to bite the government later on, because all those people who were let go or prosecuted, etc., kind of became bitter, and the next opportunities they had, they voted the government out. But there's also another way to look at it, and I'll do just that now. But to sum up, and again, feel free to ask questions if you need more details about anything I've already said. If Georgia could, anyone can. I think that's one reason, because again, I mean, it was terrible. It was way worse than I assume it is in Lebanon now. And if we manage to do that, I don't see why anybody else wouldn't be able to do that. And it is my experience that in whichever country you go, you know, people believe that the corruption is worse there and it's endemic, and yeah, maybe others can change, but yeah, not us, because I mean, it's in our blood, it's in our culture, it's in our history, etc. But again, I mean, experience shows that it's not. I mean, people are people, and if the environment is right, if the incentives are right, if the vision is right, then I mean, it's really not that hard to do. You can do it in like 4 years. So not really that tough to achieve. Yeah, you need the government that wants to do it, that's for sure. And what enabled us to do that was a so-called Rose Revolution. Essentially, it was a peaceful change of government after the previous one rigged elections on huge scale, that people just threw them out, and the new guys came in and they did it. And yeah, you need a government who wants to do it, but people can get that government in place if people want to, and then yeah, government can do it in a short period of time. The second point is reforms cannot be too much; they can only be not enough. You cannot really put off things for the later for political reasons, and reforms are essentially a primarily political affair. I mean, you need technical knowledge and understanding how to do that, but that's really secondary. Primarily, it's a political thing, and politicians do tend to, you know, make decisions not for technical but for political reasons. And I mean, if something's going to be really unpopular and painful, yeah, you don't want to do it now, because I mean, now you want to do something else. And that was the approach. And what the reformist government did was that, I mean, it kind of half reformed the judiciary, the courts and prosecutors' office, etc., etc. We kind of reformed it enough for those systems to serve the government interest well, but not enough for them to serve the public interest well. And essentially what happened was that the people wronged by judicial system, they came back to you know, kick the reformist government out, essentially. And those who were on top of the previous corrupt regime, well, some of them found way back, because I mean, they had the support from the people who suffered from the unreformed parts of the system. Again, I mean, you fail as a system or you win as a system. So in our experience, and they may or may not be true for everybody else, reforms cannot be enough. You go at it and do it, or well, you risk not being successful at large. I mean, you can have small successes, but it's not sustainable. It's not the full story. Essentially, because we didn't push hard enough, we lost a chance as a country, and we're suffering from it now, to complete the transformation. And because we didn't complete the transformation, now we are slowly but steadily, it seems, right now in Georgia, we are rolling back. Okay, and probably that's the worst things that could have happened to us. But now, at least we know how what the success looks like, and we can at least know that, well, this is what we have to aspire to again. It kind of continues with this point that it's hard to break a well-reformed system. Those institutions that were best reformed, they still stand strong. I mean, the gloss is a bit lost, and the customer experience probably is a bit worse than it used to be. But as a system, it's still a clean system. It's still corruption-free. I still get my service on time without any major hurdles. The better reform, the higher was the quality of the reform, in the past, the better the systems still survive now. But they also will decay if we don't manage to get the other ones up and running. And number four, and I think I've covered it. I mean, there are people, especially in the rank and file, who suffer the results of the reform. I mean, they lose their jobs, they lose their incomes, they are asked to change, and that's a difficult ask for any person. And I think one thing that we missed out on was that we didn't give much consideration to the people who went out of the public service. And those were tens of thousands of people, over 100,000 of people. And that meant that, I mean, it was about 100,000 families, because, I mean, there were the people who fed their families, who got the income for their families. And we did nothing to help those people. We didn't give them compensation that would be any meaningfulness. We didn't offer them training or retraining, etc. So those people were out there bitter in the cold, and again, not really happy with the rest of us, that things were changing for better, because for them, things changed for worse. And we probably would have done a smart thing to take a better care of that part of our society already then. That would be a smart thing to do. So those are the four kind of the big takeaways that we think that were important for us in Georgia from our experience. If you'd like to get a bit more in-depth view of what was done, I can recommend two excellent sources. One is publication by former Prime Minister of Georgia, Nick Gilauri, who did a big part of this, and it's really about from economic policy standpoint. And there's also publication from World Bank that covers the same content, but from a fighting corruption standpoint. So those are very good sources, and I invite you to, and they're freely available on the internet. So I invite you to take a look if you would like to have more details. Well, that was my introduction. I hope to make it more brief, but that's it. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, Irakli. That was really, really wonderful presentation. I think both a great message of hope for everyone, but also a salutary warning that once you start, you cannot stop. You just have to keep it. It's a constant battle to keep reform going and to make sure that you do the job properly. And that also that you really do need to think about those who are going to be negatively affected by it and how you support them. That was really brilliant. Thank you so much. I would like to invite any questions, firstly from the audience, and then obviously we'll also be going online. And Alex, can I ask you again to compare the online questions? So I think Ryan, you had a question. We'll just wait for the microphone. But thanks.
I don't know. Is it? Yeah. Thank you very much for this amazing presentation. It definitely gives us a lot of hope. But my question is, with regards to the leadership roles, who was the visionary, who was the champion, and who was the enforcer?
Right. Thank you for the question. The visionary was the guy who actually, created that formula. He's not alive anymore. It's Aha Ben-Duki, the father of Georgian reforms. In terms of his position in the government, well, he had a few. At some point, he was Minister of Economy. Then there was a special post created, a state minister for reform coordination, I guess. So he had official government positions. Though his influence kind of went way beyond of his formal powers in terms of envisioning the things that actually happened in Georgia, and he draws a kind of debate of what had to be done. The champion, I mean, the key champion was the president of Georgia then, Saakashvili, but also, I mean, the people. There are kind of many champions on a level below the ministers, the heads of agencies. And I mean, those were not technical experts. Those people who kind of got the point what the result had to be and knew how to organize the resources. But I mean, we didn't know much technically those days. For that, we used the support from outside. But we had people in every agency or ministry or organization that had to change, who kind of drove it there. But on a high political level, it was a president who kind of sold or explain the necessity for those reforms to the public. So he was a champion. And the enforcers, there are a couple of people essentially in law enforcement. There was Minister of Justice and Minister of Interior. Those are people who kind of did the punishing, if you wish, and they were properly hated for that. I can tell you that. So those were the enforcers. You can say that the justice system, in a sense, was an enforcer, but they were personified by Minister of Justice and Minister of Interior those days. I hope it answers it.
Thank you, Irakli. Alex, do we have any questions from online?
Not yet, but maybe could I ask a question? I'm just going to go for it. So it's really about this point about the pain that citizens and different groups felt as a result of the reforms. Do you have any lessons on how a government can handle that, and particularly how they can communicate and create a narrative that, essentially the reforms and policies that need to happen will cause pain to particular groups in society, but there is a long-term benefit to the economy and to the country going forward. So if you have any views on how you can handle that communication and narrative about the pain, but the longer-term benefits, that would be really interesting to hear. Thanks.
Right. On part of it, we probably have better lessons on how to mishandle it, and on some others, maybe we do have lessons on how to do it right. In terms of the people who would be negatively affected, as I said, essentially we mishandled it to the degree that I think the people who were in civil service and who were part of the very wrongly structured civil service, they're vilified, if you wish, right? They're pictured as bad people, bad individuals, bad persons, and I think that was wrong. I think a bit more empathy, especially again not to the leaders and creators to the system, but to the rank and file. Some empathy could be a good thing to have at that point, because I mean they did suffer not only financially but also psychologically a lot because of that. In terms of how to explain the success of the reforms, I think it was mentioned already. I think it might have been you actually who mentioned it. I mean, the best communication is results, essentially. I mean, again, my personal story about the passport, right? I mean, in 2006, the second time I was getting the passport, I knew that good things were happening, right? I mean, I watched TV and people explained it and all. But I really felt the change when my second experience of getting passport was so much different from the previous one. So I think the best communication is to have results quickly. And again, that is possible. And I mean, we all know there are low-hanging fruits and things that are easier to do, etc. So I mean, the quicker you start to produce results, the easier is to sell a next difficult thing. I mean, people are smart. I mean, nobody's an idiot not to understand that. Yeah, I mean, you have to break down certain things to build a new nice one. It doesn't take much explanation. It does take demonstrations, though. I mean, once you said it, you have to do it. You have to, people have to feel it, and then they believe you, and then they're more willing to, do more harder, difficult things. Then at some point, we were ready to pay for the electricity, okay, because nobody paid for electricity in Georgia, like ever. And at some point, we started to, because, I mean, we said that, yeah, okay, if there's going to be electricity, we're going to have to pay for that. The second thing is symbols, the sequencing of reforms, right? I mean, the first thing that we tackled was the so-called traffic police. That was the kind of, that epitomized what corruption in Georgia was. There was a guy in ugly uniform who would stop you for no good reason and take small amount of money just because, I mean, he could. And the first thing to do was that we just dismissed that police force, 47,000 people or something that were let go. And well, traffic got a lot better, I can tell you that, and the people did drive more carefully. But yeah, that was a big communication message, if you wish, about what the change meant. the change actually meant, things being better, not worse. You cannot always be that radical, right? I mean, you don't always have those kind of opportunities to do those type of things, but you have to go after the big symbols, whatever symbolizes what is wrong with the system or with the country. And then you have to produce results quickly. And I think those two things work best. And in terms of explaining, yeah, I do things that you can do in terms of verbal storytelling or narrative. It can be very simple because, I mean, people get it.
Thanks, Irakli. I think the two really important points for me is that the first is, what I think you described it earlier as making the civil service a noble profession again, making people feel the value of what they're doing as public servants, and that not vilifying them, but actually giving them, a real sense of what they're doing is worthwhile and valuable. I mean, I think the other point that you also made is very strongly is this, you need to have results that are tangible, that people can see, so they really do see that the benefits of this, and that therefore offset the pain. That's really helpful. Another question from the audience? Any other questions from the audience? Conscious you've been sitting there for 3 hours very, very patiently, so thank you all very much. And any other thoughts or any other questions for Irakli from the audience here? Any of the other panelists, either Zaina or Nerji, anything you would like to ask?
I have a quick question.
Go ahead, Nerji.
Whether there are any corrupt or politicians who were deemed to be corrupt that are still out of jail?
No one else is in jail now. I think everybody who got to jail was released by now. Some of them came back to the government. So
that's not good.
That's terrible. That's quite terrible.
Especially So anyhow, there was a period of hope. Do you feel that it's long lasting because the population is now sees itself as an active actor in reforms?
I don't know how much public feels a part of, especially active part of reforms. I think, but what I think public feels is that, again, I think what is important for us is that we have seen that things can be better, right? We have seen how things can be right. And now when things are backtracking and things are getting worse again, there's unrest and there's unease among the public. I mean, there's more and more protest. It's a hard fight to fight. And again, we have the big neighbor who makes sure that, we are flooded with fake news and disinformation, etc. And there's COVID, and it's a tough situation now to fight any fight, essentially. But I think the most important long-lasting effect that the reforms had, it's not forever lasting, but it's long-lasting, is that once we had the success story, once we have seen how things can change for better quickly, that government can be competent and the government can care and then government can do something decent for a change. Once you have seen that, you kind of want it back once you lose it. So I think that's a long-lasting part. So what the public can do, is get a decent government again to do the decent things, like vote out one and get in powers the other. But in terms of pushing for this or that particular reform or being active in that way, no. But for wanting a good life, yes.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nerji. Thanks, Irakli. Any other questions from the panel or from online?
Yes, James. Actually, I have a question. So thank you so much for the great presentation. I'd like to know what was the role really of the private sector in the reform process. How exactly did they contribute? How were they involved? And yeah, thanks.
Okay. Well, they had to be involved because we were changing the things that affected them directly. In some things, they were playing a catch-up. The government moved way quicker than, they would imagine the government could move. We were changing things very quickly, so they had to play catch-up. That was not a problem for many things, except when that got to tax code and essentially tax code, a bit customs regulations, but primarily tax code. When the government was changing a lot and very quickly and doing it continuously, at some point business said that, guys, I mean, that's impossible. I mean, you want us to be open, we are open, we pay our taxes, excellent, but I mean, we cannot catch up with the pace you have. So then we had to slow down and really involve them in terms of how things would be changed and give them more time to adapt and take on their ideas on board a bit more. In other ways, because we didn't have at that point a industrial policy or economic policy, but rather our policy was that we're not going to have a policy, was that we were abolishing things and abolishing regulations, etc. They didn't really have to be involved in a sense that give us advice, how to abolish something. You just abolish something, right? And they were just happy about it. But the two things, primarily the tax code and the customs, at some point they said, wait a minute, you need to hear us more. And yeah, at some point we slowed down and started to talk more with them. For government as well, once you get all the success, you kind of think that you know everything, right? I mean, you think that you are the best. And for the record, Georgian mothers are also excellent in making sure that we think that we are the best thing after sliced bread on the white hair. So the government thought that, I mean, it knew it all. We did things that, we were the kings of the universe. So at some point, business had to say, slow down, guys. Wait a minute. It's not that perfect. And then we did slow down. I think right now, as things are getting worse, the business and private sector is becoming more and more active in terms of communication with the government, right? Because I was talking about that we have seen success story and now want it back. Well, business have seen effective government, so now it's pushing to get one back. Okay, so now they have different associations and they lobby and they make statements and they do everything and anything they can to communicate and achieve some kind of change. But back in those days when the reforms were happening, I mean, the reforms were, abolishing things, deregulating, simplifying. So they didn't really have to do much. Once things got complicated, yes, they got involved.
So does that address the question?
Yes, thanks.
That may not be something that applies to Lebanese situation now, but that's what was happening in Georgia those days.
Alex, anyone else?
A follow-up question, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Zain.
On that, so I was wondering what was the institutional capacity back then. So what I understand is that this was a government-led process. I understand that they were also reforming the civil service and public administration, but was this happening at the same time? I mean, did they have the capacity internally to, identify what to abolish and to reform the other areas that needed to be reformed? Thanks.
Yeah, good question. Well, there was not much, especially in terms of institutional capacity. I mean, I got to the government when most of the job was done, and even then I was 28, I think, when I became deputy minister. So I didn't have, I had some education, etc. But and there were like young guys before me who were 28s and 27s. We didn't know much in terms of technical knowledge. Again, I think what we had in terms of capacity was the ability to have a clear vision and to communicate it internally, so that capacity was there, and to then lead and organize a process at large in terms of capacity. In terms of technical knowledge, we didn't have much. That's where the technical assistance and development assistance kind of stepped in when necessary, in cases where the visions matched. Because it didn't always match, right? I mean, when we went for this hard deregulation, etc., the World Bank was not happy, and IMF, and nobody was happy. I mean, everybody thought that it was the stupidest thing to do. Okay, but I mean, then you can find some other advice as well, and some other people. And we went for the Polish reform guys. I think it was Balcerowicz, a very popular name those days, and the Baltic guys who did the reforms there. So we asked advice from that, and in terms of deciding what to abolish and what not, it was, I mean, painful, but it was not intellectually taxing as a process, if you wish, because everything was defunct. I mean, nothing really served the purpose. So it was not a discussion whether in general, ideally, this should be regulated or not in ideal world. The discussion was that, is it serving the purpose now? Or it's just a paper pushing exercise to generate, corruption income? And the answer was, in, I don't know, 99 out of 100 cases, yes, that's a corruption exercise. So that was the heuristic, okay? And then that's how we got from 900 to 50. There were areas where you had to have a process, I don't know, construction permit, or the areas that really, really directly applied to health and safety of public, etc. And there, okay, I mean, we kind of were intelligent enough not to abolish that regulation as well. But other than that, I mean, things were so bad that, you could just say that, yes, this serves no purpose other than corruption, so let's abolish it. But in terms of institutional capacity, it was on-job training for every single one of us. It was a lot of good advice coming from outside, from the people who already did it, again, Eastern Europe, Baltics, etc. And in terms of technical capacity, a lot of development assistance that came from all different possible kinds of donors. Unilateral, multilateral, institutional, this and that. There are lots of people helping us. We didn't do it alone, not by far. But yeah, that was a case.
Thank you, Rick. That's really helpful. Zaina, anything else to add to that, or should we?
No, I'm good. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Back to the audience. Yes, a gentleman here.
James, we've got some online if I can come in after the audience.
Yeah, great.
مروان، اسمي مروان عوض، بدي احكي بالعربي.
تمام.
شكرا لك. بالنسبه لنا انت بطل، بس بدي اقول لك انه نحن الحمد لله اللي شايفهم هون كلهم كمان هني ابطال. بس نشكر الله صار لك فرصه، وان شاء الله نحن باذن الله عم نشتغل انه تنضل يطلع لنا الفرصه. انا مزارع باخر عكار، فلاح بالارض. انا ما قدرت وصلت للمؤسسات المانحه، وكثير اشخاص بلبنان 80% تقريبا ما هني بيقدروا يوصلوا للمؤسسات المانحه. بس نشكر الله مع فريق الليب هني وصلوا لعندي. هن اللي راحوا لعندي وقدروا طالوا اشخاص كثار مثلي، بعتقد هن موجودين هون بهالصاله. اعطيتونا ملاحظات كثيره واشياء داعمه وحلوه، بس بتمنى تسمعوا رايي. مثل ما اعطيتونا اراء كثير حلوه، اسمعوا هالراي البسيط من فلاح باخر لبنان. انه المؤسسات المانحه وقوه المنح اللي عم تيجي على لبنان هي كثير كبيره، ولكن انتم عم تعطوها يمكن بعتقد بطريقه غلط، لانه بعدكم عم تتعاملوا مع نفس الاشخاص اللي عم يرجعوا يوزعوها لنفس الاشخاص، وما عم توصل الاشخاص اللي هن بحاجه لها. مثل ما انتم عم تقولوا لنا نحن ما بنعرف نشتغل وما عم نعرف نطلع من الحالات اللي نحن فيها، نتمنى عليكم شوي تسمعونا، انه الطريقه اللي عم تعملوا فيها على الاشخاص او القنوات الرسميه اللي انتم على لبنان عم تروح لاشخاص بس معينين، وعم تبقى مع اشخاص بس معينين، وهن عم بيطيروا، والاشخاص الثانيين هن عم ينزلوا لتحت بعضهم، وضعهم عم يزدري من يوم ليوم. بتمنى مثل ما عمل فريق الليب انه تتغير الطريقه شوي، وتروحوا انتم لعند الناس اللي هن بحاجه لهالمساعدات لهالمنح هيدي. بتمنى يسمع كل الدول المانحه، بتمنى من شخص بسيط انه تسمع هالكلمه، انه في طريقه غلط عم توصل فيها المنح للناس. شكرا.
Thank you, Marwan. Could we get a quick translation? Thank you. But it's a little bit late, is it? Okay. Sorry, Irakli, for the short pause. Could we get a quick from the translators? A quick, thank you. A quick recap. Sorry. So thank you, Marwan. Thank you so much for the translation as well. So just to for those of you listening online who weren't able to understand the Arabic, Marwan was saying that the support has been gratefully received, but there is a greater need, and that aid should be spread more widely, and asking the donor countries to think more carefully about how that aid is distributed. So thank you, Marwan, for that point. Alex, I think you said there are some questions from online.
Yes. So from Alia Mubayad, who used to work for the World Bank in kind of Eastern Europe and Central Asia as well. She has a few questions. So firstly, would you say the reforms helped weaken the capture of the state by the politicians? Secondly, what was the role of Parliament in the reform process? And then kind of thirdly, in hindsight, when you think about the kind of recent judicial appointments, do you think that's kind of undermined progress on judicial reforms? Are there any kind of generalizable lessons on how to do judicial reforms that Lebanon can learn from?
Thank you. I'll start with the Parliament one because it's quicker, I guess. Well, Parliament's role was not, I mean, whatever new legislation there was, they had to legislate, clearly. The government, the executive was in a driver's seat, in a sense. It was executive-led reform process. So they brought everything towards Parliament. Parliament essentially ended up, voting on it and legislating. There was a big majority, so for the ruling party, it was easy to legislate. Essentially, in the days of the hard reforms, it was good stuff. Even whatever oppositions there was, I mean, they couldn't really say that it's not a good stuff. So Parliament was there, and it kind of did its job, but they didn't really lead the process in any way. At that point, the Georgian government system was very executive heavy. We changed the constitution since then, but then it was really a kind of strong presidential system. In terms of the judiciary appointments, well, I mean, if there's any experience of judicial reform in Georgia, it's how not to do things rather than how to do them, essentially. And I mean, we talk about the waves of judicial reform, and the third wave and fourth wave and fifth wave and sixth wave, and after every wave it's complete and it's perfect. But actually, it's terrible. So sorry, not really. I probably the Georgian lesson is that, I mean, it's the most important. It's a single most important reform. That's probably, I mean, the one thing is that it should be a starting point. If you want to start somewhere, you have to start there. Which is difficult because it's also extremely difficult area to interfere with, and judiciary is a kind of a branch of government, and they have this formal independence and all. But if there's no justice in the country, everything is short-lived. Every other success is short-lived, if you wish. So that's a lesson from Georgia. We don't know how to do it. Sorry, can't help you there. In terms of I mean, we had some advances in terms of attestation of the judges and the how to change the cadre, etc. But it's really technical, not important. In terms of the what was the last question? I'm sorry. The
state capture. The question of state capture.
Whether reforms weakened it. That's a good question, a tricky one at that. Because in the later years, the government, the reformist one, the nice one, was accused of state capture, essentially. And the success they had with the reforms, if anything, allowed them to capture it strongly, probably. It's when they started to misuse it, it costed. So the overall probably answer is no. The reforms, the technical reforms, the fact that the system is clean in terms of corruption and efficient in terms of the services it provides does not automatically translate into a more democratic, transparent system. No. I mean, what it does is that once you get good life in one area of your life, you do tend to start demanding a better life in some other areas as well. And you don't want the politicians to have that strong grip. And then they have to listen to you more too, because I mean, you know, more or less, I mean, that's how they rule. So it kind of indirectly contributes to weakened state capture. But I wouldn't say that there's a very direct, in Georgian experience, again, there's a very direct kind of links that once we got rid of corruption, we also got rid of state capture completely or something like that. So the answer would be, yeah, not that easy. But in any case, I mean, well, if there's a state capture in a sense that, you know, the government has all the power, but it's doing nice things, okay, I mean, that's still better than the state capture when the government is doing all the wrong things. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Irakli. Thank you to our to the audience. Just to say, thank you for the really helpful lessons for us. Firstly, that things are possible. Change is possible with the right commitment. Even the most hopeless cases can be reformed. That is a vital lesson. I think the second lesson that you've really taught us is it's not easy, and you have to be constantly vigilant, and you have to keep working at it. It is always a work in progress. But I think the final lesson that you've left us with is once people get a taste of how things can be better, there's no going back, and there is still that momentum and that desire for creating a better system. So a huge thank you to you, Irakli, for sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you so much for being here and for that wonderful presentation, for your great insights. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We can continue the conversation online. We can continue the conversation out in the corridors. Huge thank you again to our panelists and also to you, the audience, for your patience and for your wonderful contributions. Do take away the report, have a read of it, and most importantly, come together for collective action, because that's the only way that we will create change. I think we all in this room believe in a better future for Lebanon. Let's go out and make it happen. Thank you.